If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
Late night shifters and those who work graveyard or overnight shifts, what are your scariest stories and creepiest paranormal encounters?
I used to work in a building with a woman I thought was a little weird. If she ever had to go up or downstairs, she would wait till someone could go with her, saying the stairs gave her the creeps. One night I had to work late on my own, and as she left, she said to me, "You really don't want to be here late on your own." But I wasn't worried. The building was closed, and nobody could get in. Anyway, I went upstairs to get something, having to go through electronic doors at various stages, which all shut behind me as they should do. As I stepped onto the staircase to go down again, all the doors in the upstairs corridor spontaneously opened and shut again. When I saw the woman again, she asked me if I had any problems with the doors. I am a registered nurse. In my career of floor nursing, I have many stories, as I'm sure many nurses do. One that comes to mind. It was an older woman that, at the end of the shift, interrupted me while I was checking in on her. As she raised her shaky hand pointing in my direction, she said, "Could you please tell him to leave?" I turned around, just the empty corner of the room behind me, and said, "Who?" Dead serious, she repeated, "Him, tell him to leave. I don't like him." I thought this was strange, as she wasn't a psychiatric patient and had no history of hallucinations. I replied, "Ma'am, there is no one there, it's just you and I in the room." She kept staring in the corner. "No, there is a man in the corner wearing a dark hood, tell him to leave." Anyway, I finished my shift and went home. I returned the following week. That patient was no longer in that room. After inquiring from coworkers, I found out she had passed away 2 days after the night she told me about the man in the hood in her room. I still get chills when I think about it. I saw something, and I can't stop thinking about it. I reside in ND, and I work third shift. I go to many different locations and clean. One of the locations I go to has deer and bunnies. I've encountered deer before, and I know to keep my distance. Towards the end of my shift, which is around 4 a.m. to 5 a.m., my coworker and I are in charge of taking out the trash. There is a field with trees adjacent to this location, which is part of a larger park. In this area it's always foggy in the morning, it's close to a river. We begin to bring the trash to the back of the building where the dumpsters are. I was next to the dumpster, ready to lift my huge bag of trash. But something just told me to look. I turned to my right, and across the street is a very tall, extremely skinny deer with huge antlers. While I stared at it, I couldn't stop thinking, what's wrong with its knees? Its knees were just so huge compared to the thin leg bones. This deer was extremely tall, and it began to walk towards my coworker and me. Its leg was so long, and it wasn't moving correctly. The legs were just too long. Then another one appeared next to the first one. Due to the fog, they looked gray, not cream or brown. But this grayish color. Their eyes were glowing, and they just stared at us. I no longer wanted to look at these things. But my body kept telling me to look. I was afraid they were going to charge and attack us. I turned to run, and my coworker was already running towards the door. They did not make any sound. These deer were extremely quiet. Something just wasn't right with these deers. They gave me an uncanny feeling. These deer were well over 6 feet tall. Something weird that happened that nobody believes happened. Anyone else experienced this? I was driving for Dr. Pepper/Snapple back in 2016. I worked nights, from 5 p.m. to 5 a.m., and hauled 2 trailers from Chattanooga, Tennessee, to a suburb of Atlanta. I can't remember the name of the town, but it was right off of I-285. I make 2 trips in a 12-hour period and load 4 trailers. Obviously my first trip would take the longest because I'd hit Atlanta around 5:30 to 5:45 p.m., the worst traffic time. I loaded up and was on my way back to Chattanooga to drop the first 2 trailers off. It was around 6:30 p.m. on 285. Traffic was, of course, barely moving. Upon seeing the sign for the Chattanooga exit, I found myself driving on a narrow highway, unsure of my location. I have a good sense of direction, so when I saw a gas station, I turned around and drove about 10 miles and found the interstate again. I realized I was maybe 25 miles north of 285 on I-75, and barely any time had passed. It wasn't even 7 yet. I finished my night that night around 2:30 a.m., maybe 3. This wasn't the only instance in which I lost time, but it was the one that made me realize something was amiss. Has this happened to anyone else? While I was in the Marine Corps, we would get stalked by these creatures in NC. It didn't matter how many of us were out there. During field operations, we carried rifles without any ammo or blanks. They would pick up whatever trash or snacks we dropped. We sometimes could see their eyes in the tree line and see random glimmers of shadows through our nods. Military nods are pretty crappy. But you can see outlines and or someone's figure. I mean, like, stuff that was used probably during the early 2000s, and they were monocular. We would hear knocks or rustling throughout our nights around Verona Loop training grounds or on Camp Lejeune. Many of us who spent time in the infantry spent 45 to 60% of the year in the woods. You could hear them at night. One night I was doing patrol ops in the woods/hills, and we decided to take a pause. It was around 3 a.m. We were taking a nap break. It was during a war game, and I was on watch with one of my buddies. As we held security, we noticed an outline in the woods. Due to our lack of sleep, we didn't believe what we were seeing was real until we communicated with each other through nods. Pebbles were being thrown at us, and we were confused. We thought we were about to be run over by OPFOR, opposition force. So we wake up our guy slowly, thinking we're about to be ambushed. Turns out we were being stalked. We decided to get into defensive positions, and the rocks kept coming, thinking we were being messed with by the advisors running around overwatching the war game. We checked on the radio if there were any nearby. None. There was absolutely nothing to report. So we thought it was OPFOR. We opened up with blanks. But, as we opened up, we saw a massive creature, and another one was about 25 to 30 meters away. The creatures knocked over a semi-thin tree and gave a deep growl. It was a sound that would unsettle individuals who had become numb to fear. When daylight came, we circled back to look, and we found huge footprints. We were so confused and shaken. After that situation, we didn't know how to explain what we saw or experienced. That night I became an actual believer. I was always skeptical about Bigfoot or some creature being in the woods. It was about 3.5 years ago. To this day I struggle to go into the woods. Thank you for listening to my experience. I need help in trying to identify a possible cryptid. I work overnight security for a water pipeline about an hour and a half northeast of Austin, Texas. A lot of the land we traverse is dense woods and farmland. Tonight, one of the guards on patrol was off of a county road with a large dense forest to the west. Along one of the curves, he saw what he described as the rear of a long-haired, massive horse or dog with no hooves that was about 2 or 3 times the size of a cow and ran away at approximately 40 miles per hour. I haven't seen this yet, but 2 other guards and our supervisor have both observed it with identical descriptions. I've tried looking across the internet to figure out what it could be, but the closest cryptid I could find was a skinwalker. I ruled out elk, deer, bears, etc., because the description really doesn't match any of those animals aside from a grizzly bear, but Central Texas doesn't have grizzlies. Any help or speculation would be greatly appreciated. Nearly 15 years ago, I worked nights at a group home for disturbed youth. I would sit in the hallway all night next to the bedroom in between doing bed checks. I would sit and squirm all night because I would have the very intense feeling of being watched. All night, for the duration of my shift. It wasn't the kids. I didn't know where it was coming from, only that it was there and very strong. It was almost a physical sensation, like a pressure, and it made my already stressful job even worse. One night I cleaned out the linen closet in the same hallway and left the door open when I was done. The hallway was so narrow that the door blocked it completely. To my surprise, the being watched feeling disappeared immediately, like a switch had been flipped. I was relieved and grateful, and I didn't question it. I planned to leave the door open during my shift from then on. Problem solved, right? No. Maybe 2 nights passed peacefully before it happened. I was sitting, in between doing bed checks, directly in front of bedroom 3. My head was turned, looking into bedroom 2, when movement from the hallway caught my eye. I slowly turned my head to look down the hallway and froze. I'm shocked to this day that I managed not to scream or piss myself. The linen closet door was now halfway open. There was a tall, elongated, person-shaped thing hunched over the back of the door, gripping it, with its head peering at me over it. It didn't have a face or clothing and was flesh-colored with elongated arms and legs. It was taller than the door, easily 7 feet. It didn't have a face, but there was no question that it was staring at me. I was frozen in shock, gurgling. I then ran into the staff office and locked myself in the bathroom, shaking, only to immediately run back out because of the kids. In my head I was screaming, "The kids are out there with it." Everything was quiet. Kids were still asleep. The closet door was still halfway shut, my stuff all over the floor where I dropped it. I was completely panicked and called my sister. I was crying, babbling. She thought I'd been attacked and wanted me to come home. I was in such a state of shock I couldn't even think of an excuse to go. Like a jackass, I sat huddled in the staff office until the scheduled relief staff came in some 6 hours later. I didn't tell anyone but my family. I always left the door open after that, reasoning that whatever it was, it could look all it wanted, but please Jesus, don't come near me again. I was an emergency dispatcher for the police department in my city, working overnights, when a woman called in to say her depressed husband had gone missing. She said he sometimes liked to go to a local, 1800s era, cemetery and just be alone. We sent 2 officers out to look for him, and they saw the door to the mausoleum cracked open. After entering the dark underground rooms, one of their flashlights caught a figure. They thought the man was standing there, but he had ended himself from a pipe overhead and died. The ceiling was so low to the ground that his feet were still on the floor. The officers hightailed it out and called back to say they had found him. This was late October in Maine. Very spooky. I worked night security at a university. While walking around the science block around 5 a.m., I caught a glimpse of a man in a gray lab coat making his way to the building's door. I think nothing of it and carry on. 2 hours later I go on another walk round and bump into a lecturer who works in the science block. I jokingly tell her, "One of your lot turned up early today." The lecturer doesn't understand what I'm talking about until I describe the guy I saw earlier. She says, "Ah, you've seen him then." It turns out gray lab coats haven't been worn at the university for 40 years, and apparently this guy is some kind of ghost that lots of people have seen, but no one knows who he is. Despite my disbelief in ghosts and supernatural phenomena, the lecturer's understanding of what I was discussing unnerved me. For all I know, she could have been screwing with me, but I'm convinced I saw someone. A pale creature on all fours encounters a security guard. A security guard in Salt Lake City, Utah, reported directly to me that on the early morning of August 8, 2010. He was patrolling an area in downtown Salt Lake in an area where there is a target under construction when around 1:20 a.m. he saw a strange figure walking on all fours with long arms and pale skin. Stunned, he went looking for his flashlight. When he looked back, it had vanished. He had been moving his patrol vehicle to the other side of the site and saw the strange creature when he was getting ready to park. He further described the strange figure as having pale gray skin with bumps, and it walked on its hands, which had to be as long as his legs. Its head was of an unusual shape, and it didn't turn to look at the witness, so he didn't see the face. It didn't appear to have any hair on its body, and it had no clothing. He reportedly found strange hand prints where he had seen it but didn't have a cam with him at the time. He didn't hear any noises but later heard noises on the roof as if someone was walking around on the roof. Additionally, the witness estimated that the creature must have been at least 7 to 8 feet in height. He could make out its spine and ribs through its skin, but the arms appeared to be muscular. This made me stop working the night shift. I worked as a PSW on the night shift at a long-term care home. I had a resident bell ring at 2:59 a.m. I went in and asked her what she needed, and she proceeded to yell that there was a man in her bathroom and that I needed to get him out. I asked her about the man's appearance, and she described him as a black figure without a face. I calmed her down and then told whoever was in the bathroom that they had to leave her alone. I then returned to my charting, and at approximately 3:10, I heard another call bell ring, this time from a different side of the floor than the first one. I went into this resident's room. This particular resident would ask for pain meds around this time, and I asked if he needed meds. He told me, and I quote, "There's a creepy man in my room with no face, you need to get him out." My blood ran cold, and I had a nurse stay with me on the floor for the rest of my shift. Black mass walking to my car at night after my shift. This just happened to me. I just got home not even 10 minutes ago, and I'm at a loss, honestly. I work at a Dairy Queen, where we have a designated field parking area for employees. I'm the only person who actually uses it. It keeps my car out of the actual parking lot and the hundreds of people who come to get food/ice cream. I was working the night shift tonight, and after we were done, I was heading to the field where my car is parked. It's pitch black out there aside from a motion light that turns on at the entrance of the gate. I was walking to my car and almost walked right into this black mass. It was darker than the night. My body immediately reacted to it, all the hairs standing up on edge. I almost felt as if a small, sudden rush of static washed over my whole body. I walked around the mass and beelined to my car. I fumbled for the keys and managed to get inside. When I opened the door, my lights sort of illuminated the area, and there was literally nothing there besides a small, old Dairy Queen sundae cup. This mass was about as big as a gorilla, the only thing I can really compare it to. Nothing followed me home, and I feel fine now, but in those few minutes I felt everything. What the hell was it? Has anyone else experienced this? I'm so curious now, it's all I can think about. A few years ago I started a call center job where we had 24/7 shifts. We were a brand new team. A colleague and I volunteered to work the first week of night shifts after our month-long training. A couple of nights in, it was just us and 3 or 4 other people in the entire office. No other companies worked that late. We were new, so we didn't know anyone else on the floor either. Sometime after midnight, she announced she was taking her 15-minute break and went to the washroom, which was right outside the main doors to our office. Right after she left, a call came in that lasted until after her break was over. The moment I got off the call, she asked me if I had gone to the washroom looking for her. I said, no, why? Turns out while she was on the toilet, she had heard my voice calling out to her. She answered and even had a brief conversation with me right up until just before exiting the cubicle. She didn't think anything was amiss until she came back inside and found me on a call that had taken at least 10 minutes by that point. As we were seated in the last row of workstations by the door, I could also attest to the fact that no one else had left the office while she was gone. So if it wasn't me, then who, or what, had been speaking to her? Later on, we learned from other colleagues that others had had encounters and that the building and office area used to be a forest and were haunted. I can't stop thinking about something I saw. I reside in ND, and I work third shift. I go to many different locations and clean. One of the locations I visit is home to deer and bunnies. I've encountered deer before, and I know to keep my distance. Towards the end of my shift, which is around 4 a.m. to 5 a.m., my coworker and I are in charge of taking out the trash. Next to this location is a field with trees next to a park. In this area it's always foggy in the morning, it's close to a river. We begin to bring the trash to the back of the building where the dumpsters are. I was next to the dumpster, ready to lift my huge bag of trash. But something suddenly prompted me to take a closer look. I turned to my right, and across the street is a very tall, extremely skinny deer with huge antlers. While I stared at it, I couldn't stop thinking, what's wrong with its knees? Its knees were just so huge compared to the thin leg bones. This deer was extremely tall, and it began to walk towards my coworker and me. Its leg was so long, and it wasn't moving correctly. The legs were just too long. Then another one appeared next to the first one. Due to the fog, they looked gray, not cream or brown. But this gray color. Their eyes were glowing, and they just stared at us. I no longer wanted to look at these things. But my body kept telling me to look. I was afraid they were going to charge and attack us. I turned to run, and my coworker was already came out of the shadow. I haven't seen anything like it online or in rumors. This was the only one-time event. What was it? I work security and had a strange experience tonight. Hey all, I work at a condo complex by the beach. I've been here for about 3 years, and my coworkers, who have been here for 10 plus years, always talk about seeing and hearing spooky stuff. To give you some background, I'm a skeptical believer. In the past 3 years, I never had anything happen that I couldn't debunk, until tonight. I was on the second floor, doing a patrol. I have a radio that I carry with me when there are 2 of us working. Normally, I'm here by myself, so I don't usually have it on me. While waiting in the lobby of the second floor for the elevator, the radio suddenly kicked on like someone was trying to talk. I took it out of my pocket and heard a faint little girl's voice saying, "Can you see me?" Twice, followed by, "I am right behind you." My initial thought was that my coworkers were playing a joke on me, so I just put the radio back in my pocket. When I got back to the guard shack, I told my coworker that it was a funny prank. He looked at me, and he's not the type to lie, and said he had no clue what I was talking about. So apparently, I had my first paranormal experience. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Update. I spoke to my boss this morning and told him what happened. He wasn't surprised and said it normally happens on the 6th floor. He mentioned that he has seen and heard 2 little kids running up and down the hallways and that they have messed with the radio. He asked around, but no one knows anything about any kids passing away here. However, this building has been here since 1974 and was one of the first condos built in the area. I was working for a web hosting company. My shift was 6 p.m. to 3 a.m. I lived in a rural part of Oklahoma, about 20 miles east of Oklahoma City. Most of the houses are farms, and they are usually separated by acres, not miles of farmland between houses. One night in September, I was driving home exhausted because I had just worked overtime, and it was about 3:30 in the morning. I turned down a road that I don't normally take because I figured, why not? It's in the country. So as I get further away from the city, the darker and more wooded the road gets. I paid no attention as I was tired. I have my headlights on high, and I turned down a road headed toward my house. After a while I feel like I've been driving for a really long time down this road with no intersection. But I keep going anyway. All of a sudden, I see something in the road, So I stop and look, and it's an entire tree branch, a huge branch. Not one I could have just run over or avoided. Not even thinking logically like, there hasn't been any storms or winds, why is there a tree in the road? I proceed to get out of my car and start trying to move this branch. Then I think I hear something, so I turn the car off and listen. It's someone whistling in the woods, on land that has no house for miles. I start to get in my car quietly, and the whistling stops. I hear footsteps stomping and getting louder. I turned the ducking car on and threw it in reverse and slammed the gas down until I got back to the main road. I still haven't gone back down that road. I work at a water plant and do a lot of shift work. The plant is surrounded by a fence for security. Beyond the fence is just a lot of woods. I'm here as the lone operator overnight sometimes. I've had a few creepy things happen. The first thing that has happened was seeing a shadow out of the corner of my eye near the perimeter fence out in the woods. Since I'm not afraid of nighttime spooks, I stopped and looked out. I didn't see anything upon inspection, but I was certain to have seen something there before. On another night and around the same spot, I heard twigs break like a heavyset animal stepped on them. I yelled out at the noise and listened for any type of response. There was no response or even movement. The first two occurrences are probably just cases of middle of the night jitters, but the third and fourth happenings have a little more substance. About a month or two ago, a valve turned itself off on its own at 4 a.m. while I was on shift completely alone. I didn't see it turn, but to avoid making this into a lengthy discussion about how this equipment works, just know that with the valve closed, nothing would have been working at all that night. The most recent occurrence was the most creepy yet to date. It happened last night, February 17th, early in the morning before anyone else had shown up to work. I was just doing a round and checking on some pumps at the time. These pumps are located down at the bottom of the plant, basically a basement. I went down there and checked everything out. I had been down there for about a minute when all of a sudden a radio turned on directly behind me. It made sort of a short, crackly noise before playing music. Well, that's it so far. I'm relatively new to this job. The Kangaroo Person. Location/date, Baquedano, Chile, June 2000, late night. Upon hearing the frenetic barking of his dogs, security guard Luis Alberto Calaver armed himself with a flashlight and a knife and went outside to investigate. Soon his lights illuminated a dark greenish form that ran very quickly, climbing up a Washingtonia palm. As he shone the flashlight at the figure, he felt his arm become cold, and the knife and watch dropped out of his hand. At the same time, the dog stood very quiet and still. A feeling of numbness overcame his body, and he ran back inside his security shack. He was followed by the dogs that hid under the room and began to shake in fear. He could only describe the creature as having large, flopping ears, fluid-like in nature, as if it was without a solid bone structure. It gave the appearance of being a flexible mass that moved around like a kangaroo. It moved silently and was about 1.30 meters in height. When he first spotted the creature, it seemed to have been crouching down behind a bush. It seemed to twist its body around and never look straight at the witness. Incredibly, despite the reactions, the witness felt no fear and did not notice any odors coming from the creature. The encounter lasted about 5 minutes, and the creature was about 9 meters away from the witness. He further described the creature as having greenish hairs about 5 to 6 centimeters in length. Soon after the encounter, Calaver had to see a doctor and lost about 20 pounds of body weight. Used to work night shifts at a remote gas station. The entire night shift, I'd see maybe 15 to 30 people on a busy night. Where I sat behind the counter, I could see the well-lit forecourt, but the darkness around it was impossible to see through. It was like being on an island in an ocean of black. One night, about 2 a.m., I'm reading and waiting for someone to show up, and suddenly I feel like I'm being watched. It was like someone flipped a switch, boom, eyes on me. I look outside, but nothing. No cars, no movement. I wonder if someone might be lurking just outside the light, but no. It really does feel like the presence is very close to the large glass windows. I try and ignore it, but in my mind's eye I cannot shake the image of someone standing right against the door, staring in. I try to be logical about it. Not only is the door locked, customers have to be served at the hatch at this time, but because some people are incapable of reading signs, the incredibly heavy metal newspaper stand is pushed right up against the door, brakes locked. There's barely a few inches of space between it and the door. Even if, theoretically, someone invented invisibility and is using it to spy on the world's most boring night shift, there would be no room for a person to stand there. It's fine, I think. No need to worry. The door's locked anyway. But what if it isn't? The feeling of being watched is still there, and despite myself, I get up and go double check the door is locked. Lo and behold, it is. I'm about to relax when I see the footprints. The big, wet footprints, just one single pair, angled with the toes pressing right against the door. Nobody crossed the well-lit forecourt, the newspaper stand had not moved. The night was completely dry. I used to work as a security guard at a hospital. The environment was typically relaxed, with my primary responsibility being the maternity ward. One night, though, one of the patrol shift guards came in to talk to me about swapping areas the following night, as he felt uneasy about something he had seen, and the dude was white as a ghost. When I questioned him about the incident, he explained that he had been walking around the perimeter when he decided to check the groundsman's shed, and something had been found there. He didn't tell me anything, all he said was, "I don't know, there's something there. I don't know what it is." I decided to go check it out, and he can stay in the maternity ward security office to calm down. I go check it out, and there is nothing, no creepy feeling or anything. I come back to the office and say nothing happened, but we can still swap areas tomorrow if he wants. The next night I go to his section and look at the patrol times and all that, and it seems pretty straightforward. It just said what time you had to check certain buildings, and the groundsman shed was at like 2 in the morning. I'm just patrolling, listening to a podcast until 2, and going to the shed. I turn my podcast off and walk around the shed just to make sure he wasn't hearing some animal. I see the padlock on the side door is still attached, but I hear breathing from behind the door. I think someone has been locked in there as a prank or something, and I undo the padlock and try to open the door. The door feels like someone is pulling on it, so I knock, and then the door just slowly starts opening. I step back to let the door swing open, and I let whoever it was out. I see nobody come out, there's no shadow. I shine my torch in the shed, and the door just slams shut. I locked the shed with the padlock, and if I ever got stuck on that patrol shift, I just looked at the lock and never got too close to it. I work at an industrial copper mine in British Columbia, Canada. The mine water gets filtered through a tailings process in ponds spread out through the woods. We work from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., and with travel to and from work included, the workday is about 15 hours long. A typical work tour is 5 nights long, and by the end of it, you are pretty tired. Driving through the forest at night, you have to get out of your truck when you get to a pump house. On several occasions I can hear the screaming of animals, various birds, coyotes, wild cats, bears, etc., and never really understand the origin of the sound. You can shine a flashlight at the woods, but it's not uncommon to find blinking reflective eyes, so it's almost better not to. You just end up creeping yourself out. One night I was at one of the pump houses in the dark, and I heard bushes rustling just feet from me, around the corner of the pump house door I just locked. I froze in place both out of fear and uncertainty as to whether I should unlock the pump house or run back to my truck. The rustling got louder, and for some foolish reason, I shined my flashlight at the noise and walked towards it. I saw the branches of the bushes explode forward as a giant brown monster popped out. It took a second to realize it was a moose. If you have ever seen a moose in person, you know they are huge. It just ducked off in another direction but scared the shit out of me in the process. I was working a day shift on a drilling rig in the middle of nowhere. The rig manager comes to me and tells me I have to switch to nights on boiler watch to supervise the new guy and make sure all the assigned tasks are completed. Apparently he failed to complete his shit list the night before. So now I'm on nights. I work with this kid, and he seems good. A guy with a solid work ethic. I can't understand why he failed the previous night. We completed all the work inside, and now it was time to go get a few things done outside. I tell him, let's get after oil changing that loader. He tells me that he can't work outside in the dark. I kind of laugh and say we are definitely going to go do that oil change. He is scared. Real fear. I ask him why, and he tells me. Keep in mind that the rig is in the middle of nowhere. Hours to the closest small town out in the bush. His story went like this. He had done everything asked of him inside, and he went and started working out of the buildings on the lease outside. He got hungry, so he grabbed his lunch. He left an apple on the hood of the truck and walked away for a few minutes. When he came back, the apple was still on the hood of the truck, but there was now a bite out of it. He looked on the ground, and there were human shoe prints leading out of the trees, to the truck, and back into the trees. We are in the middle of nowhere, and there is no way someone should be out there in the bush in that temperature at that time of night. So I start thinking. That means somebody was watching him from the darkness of the trees and took the time to mess with him. This person is either the funniest guy alive or a super strange bushman. Looking at where we were, the chances of him being the funniest guy ever were very slim. So now we have a strange man in the bush watching us. As a 6 feet 4 inches, 260-pound rig hand, I'm weirded right out by this story. Sent a shiver up my spine when I realized how that must have gone down. We went, and the footprints were still there. We changed the oil, but we both had pipe wrenches as weapons in case we had a visitor. Still creeps me out to this day. I have worked as a volunteer at the Waverly Hills Sanatorium, and I have been on many tours and investigations. I will start by saying this: it doesn't matter who you are or what your beliefs are, things happen in that building that are not explainable. I have witnessed individuals succumbing to possession, and I have also experienced an attempt to subjugate me. I have heard voices with nobody around, I have smelled cigars when nobody was smoking. People have pushed me up against walls, I've seen doppelgangers, and I've watched inanimate objects move on their own. The most impressive thing to me is that when I was doing an overnight investigation with 2 small groups in the building, I walked down to where the restrooms were while my his cousin, and his wife were standing on the 4th floor along with a couple of people from the other group. My is a complete non-believer, she refuses to accept anything as being paranormal. When I walked back up to the 4th floor, they weren't there. I ended up finding all of them on the 2nd floor, shaking. After I had walked downstairs, they all saw the exact same thing at the same time. Keep in mind a couple of them are total strangers. They all saw a huge black shadow move towards them in the hallway, as well as a smaller shadow come crawling on the floor rapidly. My who is not a believer, broke down in tears. None of the people in that group would go back to the 4th floor. It really is something to take a total skeptic and let them see something so unexplainable for themselves. I was a security guard at a scrap yard. One day I went into the small management building to do my business. We had a small bridge with a scale, cars would drive in, get weighed, then drive out and weigh again to see how much scrap was removed. Of note, this was during the Slenderman craze, and someone had drawn his symbol all over the place, most likely bored kids with their parents looking through the scrap when no one was looking, or people that came onto the site when there was no one there. Yes, even though I worked security, I'd get there after the crew had left for the day and leave before they arrived. I was a security guard at a scrap yard. One day I went into the site building to do my business. We had a small bridge with a scale, cars would drive in, get weighed, then drive out and weigh again to see how much scrap was removed. Anyway, after I'd cleaned up, I noticed the scale was going from 0 to 200 pounds. I looked out the window. This yard was in a wooded area, and the trees weren't moving an inch, so it wasn't the wind. Then I heard a roaring sound. Even though this was a wooded area, we were still developed enough for there to be no animals that could make that sound. I spent the rest of the shift in my car, the fence gate opened, and I prepared to get out of there if needed. 2 horrifying looking creatures in South Dakota. On March 5, 2011, near Eagle Butte, South Dakota, an employee at the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe Reservation, a security guard at a casino, was driving home alone after work when he began seeing red lights around 2,340 resembling softballs and hundreds of them that were apparently spinning around the car while driving south on Highway 20. The red balls, seemingly hundreds of them, kept pace with the vehicle for a couple of miles. They never did get very close to the car and stayed at about 2 car lengths away. After a couple of miles, the car began to slow down. It slowed down to about 40 miles per hour, and it wouldn't go any faster. Then the red lights just disappeared in plain sight. The car then sped up back to 60 miles per hour. He then reached where a gravel road meets Highway 63. He had turned into Highway 63 by now, at one of the wind block experiment stations or soil erosion experimentation. At this point, he began getting goosebumps all over his body, a sort of tingly cold feeling all over his body. He then saw this thing on the side of the road where the gravel road meets the main highway, and before he knew it, he was by the car. It then reached in and touched the witness's head through the windshield and ran its hand down the witness's back. His back got extremely hot. He described the creature as having an oblong-shaped head, a really thin body, and thin arms and legs. It was translucent and glowing like a very dim light bulb, and he could see through it. Its eyes were the size of humans, and it had a really long nose and a huge mouth. Its arms were like sticks, and it had its really thin, stick-like arms stretched out. These also glowed softly. It was around 4 feet tall. At this point the witness saw another creature on the other side of the road, left-hand side. He described the second creature as horrifying with a beast-like wrinkled face, squat in appearance, and about the size of a goat. It was glowing reddish-brown in color. As soon as he saw the second creature, it seemed to vanish. The first creature apparently remained by the vehicle for about 10 minutes, as the tingly feeling would not go away. The witness eventually drove away and began to feel better as he approached a bison farm about 15 miles from Eagle Butte. According to his wife, he was in a very agitated state when he arrived home. I saw a faceless man. Last night I saw a faceless man. For context, I have had a handful of paranormal experiences throughout childhood and adulthood. But what happened last night was a first. I was driving my boyfriend home after my shift. It was around 7 p.m. He lives in a house in a residential neighborhood in Los Angeles. About 2 blocks away from his house, I saw a man in a hoodie standing completely still in front of the fenced house. I did a double take but was paying attention to an audiobook that was playing. I mentioned what I saw to my BF, and he said he didn't see anything. I dropped him off and kissed him goodbye. I made a U-turn and decided to pass by the same house to ease my mind. Knowing I saw at least a resemblance of a face would help me know that my imagination was just getting away from me. This time I drove a little slower. As I passed the man in a hoodie again, I let the side of my headlights illuminate the space where a face should be. He had no face. I don't mean darkness where a face should be. I mean a blurred out flesh tone face. I got a safe distance away and pulled over to text my BF. I asked specifically, "Did you not see him because you weren't paying attention? Or did you really just not see him?" He said he had his head up and was looking around as we were driving and didn't see him. I have been meditating and accessing my personal psychic abilities this and last year, mostly self-work / cleansing and grounding exercises. Did I see the complete materialization of a spirit? Demon? Did it follow me home? I can't share this with my parents because they are very Catholic, and any time I've talked about an experience, they get uncomfortable. And I don't want to freak my BF out. We have a solid relationship, and although I know we can talk about anything, I don't want him or my family to worry about me. I would love some feedback. My first security post. 10 years ago I started working for a security company as a guard. My first post was a place in Flint, Michigan, called Diplomat Pharmacy. A little history, the place was originally a GM plant and the site of one of the sit-down strikes in the 40s. I started working third shift. Granted, I'm not a big fan of walking around in the dark, but that's what it is. Every night, a patrol was conducted every 2 hours. It was wild. Constantly throughout the night, I would hear footsteps, creaks, and bumps. There was a constant feeling like I wasn't alone, and this was at 1 or 2 a.m. This went on a nightly basis. One time in particular I remember being on the 3rd floor. The 3rd floor was easily the worst spot for me in the building. As I was patrolling, I was passing the elevator. Now, mind you, this is 3 a.m., and as far as I know, I'm alone. As I'm walking, the elevator kicks on and starts running. This was a bit alarming. On the 3rd floor, the elevator door opened toward me without anyone. Depending on what floor I was on, I would use the bathroom, and the toilets would flush without being in use. Again, this would happen in the middle of the night or early in the morning. I eventually switched to the 2nd shift. I thought warming in the day would be easier, and to a degree it was. One afternoon I was patrolling an office. It was a perfect sunny blue sky day. As I was passing, I saw a silhouette in the window, like someone was staring in it. The silhouette was visible through the blinds. Now I'm working in the city of Flint, so the idea of a homeless guy or a crackhead staring through the window wasn't a concept that I didn't consider. I raised the blind, and nothing happened. The sky was bright and blue. So I lowered the blind, and the same silhouette of what looked like someone. I used to work in remote areas in northern Canada. Fly in via helicopter to a fishing lodge, then fly to the middle of the bush to mark right-of-ways for future roads, usually 30 to 45 minutes flight away from the lodge. It was 100% that the only person near me during the day was my one male coworker. On many occasions, both of us would stop and ask, "Did you say something?" Usually, the answer was no. I clearly remember one situation where I stopped to grab a bite to eat, and he kept walking. Halfway through my sandwich, someone said my name very close to me, so clearly I responded, "Yes." Before I realized it, I could hear my coworker in the distance breaking branches while walking. Needless to say, I packed up and made good time to meet up with my coworker. I'm a security contractor, and I was working at night. The building had cameras that picked up everything in that parking lot and inside it, etc. A pretty normal night until I was called in by the guys looking at the camera, saying some dude was loitering in the rear lot, which is blocked off to the public. You need a key card to get in. And there is always a guy sitting at the entrance to the lot. So it was rather confusing how somebody got in. I wasn't at the time worried because I have a stab-proof vest and a taser, so I figured I'd tell the guy to leave and everything would be perfect. I couldn't have been any more wrong. I go outside, and I don't see anybody there. I call in to the guys looking at the camera. They say he's walking towards me, and he's right in front of me. I begin to experience an unsettling sensation in my gut. I'm getting paranoid, so I say nobody is here, and I say I'm coming inside. No big deal, But then they say the guy is sprinting towards me from behind. I pull out my taser and aim it. Nobody is there. So my guts still feel awful, and I throw up. Then I think about all those horror movies and run back inside. That guy is still running to me according to the dudes in the camera room. Then they yell, "Head's about to tackle me," and then I fall on my face as if somebody shoved me. Then the guy disappeared, as if he went through the ground. The only reminder I have is my broken nose and the stories my coworkers always tell me about. I work as an in-home CNA, and I believe that my patient's house is ghosts. So I would love some insight as to what's going on here. I have a client we will call Kat. A month ago, I took on Kat as a patient. She is 78 years old and suffers from dementia. Encounter 1. One day I went down to the basement, as that's where the laundry room is, to do some laundry. As I was loading them, Kat came and silently stood behind me with a blank stare. When I turned around, I was a little frightened but just led her back to her chair upstairs, where she normally sits. I have no idea how she got down there, and the stairs usually creak, so I'm not sure why I didn't hear it. The stairs are located directly above the washer and dryer. I think nothing of it and continue what I'm doing with no problems. My stomach started hurting while switching laundry, so I went to the restroom. It's in the same room as the laundry. When I came out, the lights were off, and I could see someone in the hanging clothes, so I kind of panicked and turned the lights on, and nothing was there. I went back upstairs, and Kat was in the chair, so I sat down next to her. Encounter 2. A few shifts go by, and I don't encounter anything too alarming until the middle of the shift. I needed to use the restroom, so I went to the one upstairs. There are no restrooms on the main floor level, just the kitchen, dining room, and living room, because I was slightly nervous about going to the basement. I shut the door behind me, and I heard a deep whisper. I don't know what it said, and it really scared me, and I turned around to go out and slipped on the rug and bonked my head. I really wanted to just brush it off since I needed to be helping my patient and not be on some crazy ghost thing, but I was really spooked by it, and now I hurry to complete my tasks if they are anywhere besides the main level. Encounter 3. A little context. Kat has dementia, as I mentioned, and requests for me to leave at least 6 to 10 times a day. However, on one of these days, she didn't do that and instead requested Vanessa to leave. I don't know of Vanessa. There was nobody else there, and nobody else was home, so I just reassured her it was just me and her. She did not want me to leave her site that day, so I tried my best to be with her the whole time while completing tasks, but she seemed really panicked. I tried to not let it get the best of me, and it could just be her having dementia, but all of it together really freaks me out. Please, if you have any insights or reasonable explanations for confirming factors, let me know. A bone-chilling encounter with children has left me paranoid. For some background quickly, I have no interest in the paranormal beyond enjoying the occasional creepy movie. 5 days ago, late at night, 9 p.m., I was grabbing some last-minute food items from a grocery store in town to bring to work. As I exited the store and returned to the underground car park, I saw 2 young children standing near the back corner of the car park. I didn't immediately have concern, but the way they stood so still and stared at me was eerie. I shouted out, "Is everything okay?" But got no response. I started to approach, and as I did, they started to approach me as well. I can't explain it, but I was immediately terrified. My body was sending me red alerts, signaling that I was in serious danger. I managed to squeak out another "Can I help you?" but got nothing. I'm sort of ashamed to admit I got in my car and tore off as soon as I could. They followed for about 5 seconds but stopped as I turned out of the car park. I glanced back for one last look, but they had turned and were walking back to where they came from. They never really acknowledged me beyond slowly walking in my direction. Something about how their heads remained motionless and how intently they walked toward me frightened me. I called shop security on the ride home and asked them to go check it out. I never received a response. This has stuck with me, and I have no idea why. Thoughts? Tall figure in my job's back warehouse. Some context. Before I get into the actual experiences, there's some important context I need to get out of the way. I work part-time as a cleaner at a clothing outlet. The actual building is huge, but only about 40% is the floor where we sell clothes and such. The remainder of the building is office space in this huge warehouse. Most of my coworkers have stated having experiences when walking into the warehouse portion of the building, which is kept dark most of the time, as when I come in, everyone who works back there is usually gone home. The key feature of this warehouse is that, once you pass through the metal gate, you will find the building's custom embroidery station on your immediate left, 2 industrial dumpsters on your right, and a long hallway containing the offices and employee bathrooms in front of the gate, separated by a portion of the warehouse. The lighting consistently illuminates this hallway, which extends to the rear of the main warehouse. The encounter, anyways, the actual encounter that I wanted to talk about. It was the middle of my shift, and I was going to the employee bathrooms because I didn't want to hold up the ones on the actual floor. I walked to that long hallway I mentioned and looked down into the dark warehouse, which is only partially illuminated on the other end by the light from another hallway. That's when I see it. There are racks full of clothes at the other end. I myself am about 5 feet 9 inches, and these racks are about a head and a half taller than me, so I'd put them at about 6 feet 0 inches 6'2" in height. At the end of the hall, a barely illuminated figure stands, protruding its head above the racks. It's like when you see a shadow moving out of the corner of your eye, but instead I was looking dead at it. Its head was amorphous, a blurry shape, but it was easily taller than these racks when I immediately saw it pull back an arm from beside the rack and duck away out of sight without a sound. 2 of my coworkers, one of whom is brand new and the other is my manager, reported having an experience exactly like this, seeing something duck away out of sight. There are plenty more experiences I've had in this back warehouse, but this is the one that's been nagging me. Is anyone familiar with what this could be? This same building has been a clothing outlet long before I started my job, possibly even a few years before 2000. All of us employees who've encountered this specific thing have just been calling it the ghost. Nurse here. One nursing unit always creeped me out, especially on nights. It was a 4-bed unit, and 2 nurses would work in it. I always hated when my partner went on break at night because I would be all alone. It was for brain-injured patients, so the patients didn't communicate or do much. This particular patient suffered from a severe and irreversible head injury, limiting his ability to speak or move independently. He was young and quite built, the kind of guy you probably wouldn't want to mess with. He had been with us for months with no sign of improvement at all. His bed was directly across from the nursing desk. One night when my partner was on break, I was watching the clock waiting for her to get back because I hated being in that room alone. A few creepy things had happened before, and I was always on edge. Suddenly, I look up because I swear this dude is standing at the foot of his bed. The room is all dark, and it's just shadows, but I can see his shape, tall and muscular, and he's standing aggressively with his fists clenched and glaring down at me. I went cold, and terror ran through me. I blinked, and he wasn't there anymore. He was lying in his bed like he had always been, still unresponsive. I never told anyone because I don't even know what I saw. So I work as security in a healthcare environment and have seen and heard some creepy things within my job that have made me believe in ghosts and a few different stories from my place of work. The first weird thing is that everyone within the hospital over the last few decades has reported a boy who would appear to patients just before they died. Especially within the palliative care unit. I've talked to nurses who had long since retired and new nurses who have said patients days before they died began seeing a young boy. Now for my personal experiences. We have an area of the hospital that is empty at night that is now offices but used to be an old folks' home. I sometimes hang out in this area in the middle of the night and have experienced a few things, from doors slamming and footsteps to a voice that came onto my radio asking me why I was there. Other individuals I know have experienced similar things, such as doors opening and slamming or a woman's voice speaking to them when there is no one around. I served as a CNA in a long-term care facility where the residents relied entirely on us for their daily needs. I primarily worked days, but every once in a while I could cover a night shift for friends. Room 4 had 2 elderly women who were suffering the advanced stages of their diseases. In other words, they were here on Earth, but on occasion they would say and do things that weren't quite here. One was completely contracted, unable to move, from the neck down and suffered spasms of the neck. The other was similar but could help roll herself and gesture with one arm. They were incredibly sweet women. Whenever I had a bad day, I'd go to them for hugs and encouragement. Like I said, they were here, but it was always simple talk as their illnesses had ravaged their brains. Anyways, I had 2 encounters with them on the night shifts that really blew my mind. The first, I was caring for a gentleman across the hall, preparing him for bed at some ungodly hour as he threw an absolute fit if he went to bed early. He had advanced dementia, and he never said anything coherent. While caring for him, he asked me a clear question: "Do we have a mirror here?" I was taken aback by the lucidity of it, but I reassured him that we did and asked him why. He then began conversing with me, and as we talked, I got goosebumps. Suddenly, the stories of this kind man made sense. He was here, lucidly, with me in all his warmth. "Well, take me to the mirror." "Yes, sir," I agreed as we wheeled up. "Look at that handsome silver fox in the mirror." He smiled big. "I always thought my eyebrows were unique," he laughed, and I agreed. He had the bushiest and most expressive eyebrows. He died suddenly after that. Fast forward to the next day, I go into room 4 to check on the two ladies sleeping. The second I walk in the door, both women start screaming eyebrow man's name. Where is he? One would ask, he is with you, the other would answer. No one had told the other residents he had passed. In another instance, I was sideways in the doorway, the only doorway, by room 4, taking notes on a resident. As I shifted myself unintentionally, in the corner of my eye, I could see beyond the curtain separating the partitions, neck spasms lady sitting half upright, she could lift her head fairly high, and whispering and giggling to a woman in a blue shawl bent over the side of her bed. I thought for a millisecond how lovely it is for her to have a visitor when it dawned on me, no one had checked in to visit her, especially that late. I whipped my head back, and the woman in blue vanished from sight. My jaw hung open, and the neck spasms lady was looking clear at me with a wicked grin. I stared blankly for a moment before I stuttered, neck spasms lady, obviously I used her real name, Did you see that? Her smirk grew wider as she nodded yes. I learned later that her mother had died in that same facility, her mother's favorite color was blue, and they shared a birthday that day. Can anyone tell me what I saw? Took place in an army training area. In early 2023, I was doing a training exercise in the woods of Fort Gregg Adams, formerly Lee, Virginia. On the first night, I was pulling security facing the wood line and saw a long, lanky, at least 7 to 8 feet silhouette of a man that was completely black. It was about 50 to 80 meters away and would peek out slowly from behind a tree and then sprint to another one and repeat this for a solid 5 minutes before I never saw it again. The sun had not quite started to set yet. I would blink hard and look away, but it was still there. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, initially dismissing it as a trick of the tree's shadows. However, other strange occurrences began to occur that night and over the following few days. First night, my squad and I heard a long, shrill scream from the area of the woods. I saw the thing running around. On the second night, my team and I spotted a 3-man team moving through the woods. When we engaged with them, they vanished and were no longer visible. One of the evaluators came over to us confused and asked what we were firing at since they didn't have any OPFOR, opposing forces, over there. After we explained what we saw, he said that at least every other rotation that comes through sees a 3-man team in the woods in the same sector we were pulling security in. Third night, the OCs, evaluators, were doing a roll call in the evening, and one of the evaluators that had left early in the day yelled, "It's me, I'm over here." From off in the wood line. Couldn't see anyone there. He had left hours ago. Needless to say, my team and I kept our sleeping bags pretty close together over those nights. More info: Gregg Adams had significant Powhatan presence in the area historically. It was also a World War I training area. I wasn't sure if they were spirits or something that was related to Native American lore. Wanted to know if anyone knows any more about the area or what this could have been. Has anyone else experienced anything similar if they've been at Gregg Adams? Last year, it wasn't uncommon for me to finish work anywhere between 2 to 4 a.m., sometimes a little earlier. I worked in a very dodgy area of an extremely shitty town that had many problems. It didn't help either that where I worked was in the dead center of town along the main strip. Anyway, for about 5 months when I first started, I didn't have a car, so I'd ride my bike to and from work. It was great. There was no traffic, and the area was empty. After a month or so, it was completely trashed. Fortunately, one of my coworkers, who happened to live next door, offered to drive me home one night. We almost always worked the same shifts, same hours, etc. This wasn't always the case, though, and as a result, I had no other option but to walk home, about a 40-minute walk, a few times. I saw and experienced many things. I'm not sure what to really go into, as there was rarely a night I'd walk and not encounter something. One of my favorites was this guy who'd just stare at me from the other side of the road. It was quite a cliché, a dimly lit stretch of road branching out from the main drag of town onto a main road that eventually led to a highway. I remember seeing him the first time. The buildings that lined either side of the road had disappeared and been replaced with dense forest. There was a solitary streetlight ahead on my side of the road, albeit not very bright. The other side of the road was illuminated by a bright orange telephone box. He'd stand inside and watch me walk past. He'd also always have the same blank expression on his face, absolutely no hint of any emotion. On the first night, he watched as I walked for about 50 meters down the road before he started to follow me parallel on the opposite side. He didn't follow for long, only about 100 meters or so before he stopped. I turned around again, and he disappeared. This happened on 3 other occasions, within the same week. He didn't follow me the other times either. I could always feel him looking straight at me. It was a strange and abnormal feeling. I never saw him again. It happened the other night around 2 a.m. I work on a military base, and our night shift has 2 people. The building has multiple entrances that remain locked during the night shift. We were seated by an external door when something tugged on the door repeatedly. My first thought was wind, so I checked the sensors, and the wind was reporting calm at all sensors. At this point I was concerned because for some reason at 2 in the morning someone was trying to force their way into a building on a secure site. I secured all the doors and informed security forces. They sent out a patrol but found nothing. You won't believe what happened to me on the night shift during the empty COVID wards. It was around 2 a.m., and I was halfway through my shift. You know how it gets dead quiet at that time, nobody around, just you and your thoughts. I was working in the back, sorting through some things when I heard footsteps behind me. They were steady, not rushed, just slow and deliberate. I turned around, expecting to see a member of the cleaning crew or a security guard, but there was no one present. I was alone. I figured maybe it was just the building settling, so I brushed it off and got back to work. Then I heard it again, this time, closer, like right behind me. I spun around fast, but still nothing. What really freaked me out was that I could feel someone watching me. You know that heavy feeling when someone's right behind you? I felt it. I even heard this weird low whisper, like someone was trying to say something, but it was muffled. At this point, I'm getting a bit spooked, but I told myself I was just tired. I decided to move into the main corridor to shake it off, but as soon as I stepped out, the lights flickered. Not once or twice, but like they were struggling to stay on. Then the air got cold. Not just a little draft, it was freezing, like someone had left a door open in the mind of chill. Then the weirdest thing happened. I was standing by the exit door, and I saw this shadow on the far wall. It wasn't my shadow, it was too tall, and it didn't move when I did. It just stood there, long and stretched out, like a figure watching me. I blinked, and when I looked again, it was gone. By this point, I was freaked out enough that I decided to take a quick break outside, but as I walked past the storage room, I swore I heard someone breathing inside. I knew no one was in there, it was locked, and I was the only one with the key. I'm not usually one to believe in ghosts or anything like that, but whatever happened that night, I still don't have an explanation for it. My patient freaked me out. I've been debating whether to share this, but it's been on my mind for a long time, so here it goes. This incident happened about 3 years ago. I work in healthcare as a patient care technician, basically a CNA, but in a hospital instead of a nursing home. During this particular night shift, my responsibility was to sit with a confused patient to keep him safe. He had dementia, so he would try to get up, wander around, or pull out his IVs. My job was to make sure he didn't get up on his own, to prevent falls, and to keep him from pulling out any lines. This kind of sitter role is pretty common for confused patients in hospitals. The patient was in his 80s, and he was so confused he didn't even know his own name or where he was. Things were going smoothly, he fell asleep around 11 p.m., but then woke up around 1 a.m. and looked over at me. To get my attention, he said, "Hey, Victoria." Although that is not my given name, I initially did not give it much consideration due to his confusion. I told him my actual name and asked if he needed anything, but he kept calling me Victoria 3 more times. Here's where it got strange. My parents almost named me Victoria. It came down to that or my real name. They ultimately chose my name because my dad wasn't a fan of Tory spelling. The names aren't even similar. I asked the nurse if this patient had any family members named Victoria or had previously had a nurse by that name, but there was no connection, no family member, spouse, or prior caregiver with that name. Trying to shake off the odd feeling, I told myself it was probably just his confusion. But a short while later, he started singing the theme song to the Beverly Hillbillies. And that's when I really got chills. When I was little, my parents used to recite that theme song as if it were a bedtime story when my siblings and I asked for a story. The whole situation gave me an eerie feeling, like this man somehow knew things about me, even though we had never met. There's no way he could have known any of my family. This was in my college town, far from where I grew up. I might be overthinking it, but years later, I still think about this night and the unsettling feeling I had. Has anyone experienced anything similar or have any thoughts on this? I'd love to hear any insights. 2 police officers witness a shadowy figure in MD. A week ago, 2 police officers from Westminster, Maryland, noticed something intriguing in a bicycle shop during the early morning hours. I consider this to be a very significant sighting because 2 police officers, with no body, in the glass of the coin shop next door. This was the direction that the shadowy figure moved toward. Once their backup arrived on the scene and took up a position behind the building that housed the bicycle/coin shops, one of the officers called the night reference that they were given, which happened to be the owner of the bicycle shop. The officer asked the owner if anyone was supposed to be in the shop at that time. The owner indicated that his son was there in an apartment in the back of the shop. Thinking that's what they had seen was the owner's son, the officers made contact with him to question him. However, upon seeing the owner's son, his physical appearance was much different than that of the black shadow that they had witnessed earlier. The officers told the owner's son what they had seen and asked if there was anyone else present. The owner's son told the officers that he was the only one there and gave the officers permission to search the shop. Finding no one else inside the shop and no signs of a forced entry, the officers questioned the owner's son further, asking if there had been other odd occurrences inside the shop. The owner's son told the officers that the building the bicycle/coin shop was in was originally built back in the 1800s. The owner's son knew of a female that had ended self in the building by hanging a few years ago. However, the figure that the officers saw appeared to be a male. The owner's son also mentioned that there were apartments above the shop and that prior tenants have reported seeing strange shadowy figures in the past. It is important to note that the apartments above the bicycle shop are in a separate part of the building and that there is no direct access from the apartments to the bicycle shop. Entrance to and from these apartments is in the rear of the building. Another thing that the officers noted is that part of the bicycle shop's security system includes motion sensors, which will turn on additional lighting when activated. The two officers who witnessed the shadowy figure both say that none of the bicycle shop's security measures were activated, yet they both saw that the shadowy figure cast a shadow against the night lighting that was on inside the shop at the time. My mom shared this story with me from her time as a nurse. She worked night shifts in a building around Tennant Street, in a care facility for the sick elderly in the 80s, in a building that was abandoned around the time that the Shankill butchers were active, and they supposedly used it sometimes to bring victims, but it had been revamped years later. Due to the troubled times, they had security and 2 big Rottweilers as guard dogs. All areas in the facility were fine, bar one spot. There was a corridor that led to one of the rooms. For some reason the lights always flickered, even when new bulbs were put in, yet there were no damages to the electrics when they were checked. When she and other staff had to go down it, the temperature was much colder than the rest of the facility, raising your neck hairs. There was a feeling that you weren't alone and being watched. It really made everyone feel on edge. The nursing staff weren't the only ones to notice this either. When the security did their rounds, the guard dogs would be fine until they came to this particular corridor. Both would whimper and refuse to walk down it, then bark and glare at nothing, yet their necks would turn slowly back and forth, eyes focused as if watching someone or something make their way down the corridor. No matter how many times the security guards tried to get the dogs to go down, they just wouldn't, so one guard had to go check it by themselves as the other stayed with the dogs. They always said the same as the nursing staff. They felt they weren't alone when walking down and checking the rooms, and they felt like they had a pair of eyes on them. They always hurried swiftly to get out of there, and one eventually quit to work somewhere else, as it just freaked him out too much. Some nurses also left. I don't know how honest my mom was, but she didn't bring it up to scare me. I was just talking to her about some paranormal stuff I'd heard about, and she seemed noticeably spooked by it. Freaky stuff. A creepy story. What did I see? I live in southern Georgia near the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge. It's more rural/wilderness here than people realize. The Okefenokee is 402,000 acres and home to all kinds of wildlife not seen anywhere else in the world. My uncle is a park ranger and has worked at the Okefenokee for 15 plus years, I think since around 2000. Back in the 2000s, park rangers at Okefenokee had a ride-along policy, whereby they could take friends/family out with them on their shift. Local officials, wildlife advocates, and others often benefited from this. But some rangers would randomly take family members, too, just for fun. I'm not sure this was formally approved, but I know my uncle had taken just about every one of our family members at some point in time. The event I'm about to describe happened in April 2007 while on a ride-along with my uncle. I was 20 years old and had just gotten back from college for the summer. My family was on an extended vacation already, and I had about a week before I would join them. I asked my uncle if he wanted to go fishing one day, but he suggested I come along with him to work instead. Just for fun. At this time, the Bugaboo fire had just started. We weren't too close to it, most park resources were dedicated to the fire by this point, but my uncle and I were not near it. I remember him saying that. I met him at the Bolt Center after dinner sometime, and we got on an airboat. The other ranger who was supposed to come with us was called to fire-related issues. I remember this because that was actually the first time I learned of the fire, listening to him talk about it on the phone, then my uncle filling me in. So we head out, just the two of us. I don't know for sure, but because we met at the Bolt Center, I assume we started west down the waterway. I don't know where we went other than this, as it was getting dark, and I just had no idea, really, where we were. I didn't give a damn. About 30 minutes in, we found two kayakers night fishing, which wasn't allowed that night. Maybe that's always the rule, I don't know. Before we got up close to them, my uncle said they were regulars here. He was supposed to accompany them back, but he said he was confident they'd be fine going back on their own. We stopped next to them, and they started talking. They were breaking the rules, but obviously they were friends with my uncle. They said they'd seen more gators in the water than ever before. My uncle had mentioned this on our ride, as we had seen several dozen, but he didn't say much about it. But these guys insisted it was unlike anything they'd ever seen. They said literally thousands, plus lots of other wildlife close to the shore. My uncle blamed the fire, and they agreed. It was spooking the wildlife and driving them to the waterways. These guys insisted we follow them up a few hundred yards to a fork in the creek. We did. I kid you not, more than 1,000 gators in a tiny little area. Packed like sardines. It was something to see. It was just about dark outside, but the airboat had a massive light on the front, and it was just amazing. They were almost layered up in 2 levels, that's how crowded the water was. What amazed me most was how close the kayakers were willing to get to these gators. Anyways, we sat there for a few minutes. My uncle was fiddling with a camera to photograph the event. Lots of bellowing and small fights here and there. The gators weren't huge, they don't get too big in South GA. The gators were not as large as those found in South Florida. But what an awesome sight. Then, after maybe 2 minutes of looking, mayhem broke out. We hadn't moved at all in 2 minutes, the gators didn't seem to mind us much, but something spooked them, and for a solid 30 seconds, the water was just insane with gators flopping all over the place, scrambling under the water, in every direction, etc. The kayakers bolted immediately, as gators were hitting their boats. My uncle seemed unaffected but was photographing everything. That's when I saw the strangest animal I'd ever seen in my life. I say animal because it wasn't a person. It's hard even to explain. It was like, part bear, part primate. I had only the peripheral light from our airboat to see this thing, so I couldn't make it out well. I say bear because of the black shine on the coat, but I later wondered if this might have been because the coat was wet. It was thick fur, either way. Primate because of how it moved and turned its roundish head, though it was walking on all fours, I think. I could barely see its eyes, I only knew they were eyes because of tiny reflections in the dark. This thing was big. It was the size of a large bear, but it was thinner and more wiry. The angle of its limbs was downright creepy, and its dexterity as it moved slowly along the shoreline gave me goosebumps. It almost moved like a spider, using all fours, as I mentioned earlier, but not like a horse would. This may sound strange, but that's the only way I can describe it. It was right up on the edge of the creek, looking at us. I didn't think to see if the gators were swimming away from this spot, but it was just mayhem in the water anyways. I pointed and yelled something unintelligible, but he kept photographing the gators. I didn't even know what words to say. I think I just said, "What the hell?" My uncle wouldn't have known I was talking about anything other than the gators. So he never even looked up at it. I turned my gaze back to him in an attempt to capture his attention, but instead, I was blinded by the boat's intensely powerful light, leaving me unable to see anything when I turned my gaze back to the shore. By the time my eyes adjusted, probably like 60 seconds later, it was gone, so no photos. No other witnesses to the creature. I started to tell my uncle what I had seen, but I felt like an idiot when he gave me a very suspicious look. I know almost nothing about the outdoors to begin with, so I just shut my mouth. But somewhere there are photos of the gators to at least prove this. I saw those because I saw my uncle showing them to my dad a few weeks later. I've just emailed him about them, we'll update if I hear back. Anyways, I was on edge much of the rest of the night. My uncle dropped me back off around midnight, he kept working, but I went home. I literally had goosebumps the whole way home, feeling like I'd see that thing on my drive. I've done some research on the skunk ape. Just so little evidence of this. I don't know what I saw, but it was something. Hoping someone here has any ideas or even similar experiences. I do security work at night. And it is in a big fenced-in yard, kind of like in a rural area. One night, I was preparing to enter the building to use the restroom, and while I was walking, I suddenly found myself in front of 4 individuals who I referred to as the bird people due to their height of approximately 4 feet. Their face was kind of humanoid, but, between a human and a bird. Their body, it was shaped like a bird, and it looked like a bird, but their face was different. Their face bore a striking resemblance to a blend of human and bird features. Kind of flat, gray, Their eyes were kind of slit, and the nose was kind of, you know, how a bird's nostril looks. This phenomenon only lasted for a few seconds. You know, I'm not the kind of person to see things even though I know a lot about different phenomena. It was 4 years ago, but it's still fresh in my mind because it was different beings and I sensed their intelligence. Subsequently, as I headed towards the restroom, I began to wonder if it was an interdimensional or out-of-body experience. This felt akin to being out in the open, and I couldn't help but believe these beings wanted me to see them. They were standing apart. There were 4 of them, and they were just looking at me. I was just looking at them. The next night I was just sitting in my car patrolling like I always do, and I heard this beautiful. It sounded like a conversation between a bird and a human being. It was like they were singing to me. It was like they knew I had acknowledged them, and they acknowledged me. It was like the most beautiful sound. It was like a melody. The melody was enchanting and captivating. It was like they were singing to me. If you're close to Nevada, you might be familiar with the concept of a catman. I used to work security at a restricted area out in the Nevada desert when I was in the military, and we always heard about a catman out in the desert. Always figured it was just a passed down tall tale from generations of security personnel posted out there since the late 40s. Then one night a friend of mine, who I actually trusted to not make BS up, was on a solo patrol in a less important part of the entire facility and had parked his truck to study some of his distance learning. Something jumped into the bed of the truck from behind and, according to him, started scrambling up to the cab and trying to get in the rear window. In a panic, he gunned the accelerator, and whatever it was tumbled out. He immediately unprocessed himself and his vehicle so he could report directly to our security supervisor, and I remember him sounding a little panicky on the radio when he asked for permission to rendezvous ASAP. The story spread like wildfire from patrol to patrol, and I assumed it was pure BS, though I couldn't fathom why this specific individual would make up something so absolutely insane. This was a pure career track guy, nothing less than walk-on-water performance reviews, fast-track promotions, etc. It was really bizarre to hear that he was telling our security supervisor, of all people, that something had tried to get into the cab of his truck through the rear window. Eventually I managed to find a reason to get relieved by another patrol and head on over to our security control. He relayed the same story to me in a very straight face and was refusing to go back out there unless he at least got a partner. I ribbed him about it a bit until he told me to go outside and check out the bed of the truck. I got my Surefire out and lit up the bed of the truck and found large scratches that had gouged out the paint and some of the bed material, running all along the bed of the truck. Sure enough, it really seemed like something with significant claws had taken a tumble out of the back. This was by far less than definitive proof of an urban legend, for sure, but there's no doubt that something very large with claws did hop onto that truck. I spent 6 years out there, and I never spotted a cougar, nor had anyone I know ever seen one either, but I don't put it out of the realm of possibility. However, a cougar hopping into the bed of an occupied truck with the engine still running and actually trying to enter the cab through the rear window is absolutely bonkers in my opinion. I'm tempted to agree that this was almost certainly a cougar, no matter how bizarre its behavior, except we did have a history of spotting anomalies on our thermal imaging equipment. Some of these anomalies were on the ground and disturbingly humanoid shaped. I personally observed in my night vision, along with my partner, a figure dashing between 2 abandoned buildings. It kept running between the 2, almost like it was playing a game, and it was covering the distance frighteningly fast. It was far enough away that you could only spot it when it dashed out of the shadow of one building and across open desert to the cover of the shadow of the second building, before repeating the action again a few seconds later. As we usually did in these situations, we sat and watched to make sure it wasn't coming closer because it was outside our sensor zones and area of responsibility. Eventually, it must have settled down or disappeared. As I mentioned earlier, it was too far away to see, except when it darted between the 2 buildings in the open desert, where there was sufficient moonlight for the NVG sensor to capture an image. Impossible to identify, but given that we knew the dimensions of the buildings themselves, we memorized the height and width of all major features both inside and outside the restricted area so we could better gauge distance and speed both for reporting and laying down effective fire if necessary. I'd estimate a height of 6 feet, give or take a foot. I'm not past saying this was a mentally disturbed individual randomly doing sprints. We occasionally got homeless people that wandered way too far from civilization. We had a lot of bizarre stuff out there, and I never truly believed in Catman, but some of the old fogies out in the desert still do. So this story is weird, not because of the contents but because the settings sound like something from a bad cliché skinwalker story. But regardless, it isn't the typical I hope you enjoy it. I was a park ranger in the southern US. My park was known for its caverns and its springs that made for excellent fishing. I began my work there as a tour guide and a groundskeeper. This would often culminate in me taking people on cave tours and helping people find their way on hiking trails, etc. The weird stuff started in the month of October, when during the routine maintenance of the cave's lighting system, you would feel eyes on you. Occasionally, you could even hear the sound of feet slapping the wet floor. I really didn't enjoy having to change the light bulbs for that reason. That being said, there was a phenomenon that when you would be closing up the museum and gift shop for the night, you would hear voices. A few times it would sound like guests, which I could explain away, but during one night I could hear someone speaking on the second story of the museum. Kind of irritated, I walked up there to let the guests know that the park was shutting down for the night and that they would have to head back to the campgrounds. However, it was pitch black the moment I got up the stairs, and I couldn't hear anyone anymore as I made my way through the museum and towards its balcony area. About the moment I crossed the threshold, I heard something hit the trees outside and tear off through the underbrush. I don't know about this, it could have been a raccoon or something, but it was certainly odd. Many times walking just through the trails from base to other resting points and ranger huts, you would sometimes hear this meow that just sounded off. It sounded off because it was a weird Chinese motion sensor we had in the ranger station to let others know if someone was trying to sneak in and steal things during park hours. The strange part is that this meow would be heard just in the tree line and literally miles from my station. Keep in mind that no other stations had this motion sensor, and it was a running joke with other stations about the awful motion sensor. It was bizarre, and the sound would move around you in circles as you hiked. During the rainy season was when it seemed to get worse, I suppose when the caves would flood and push whatever thing was living in the deeper unexplored parts out into the tourist areas. I would often hear other rangers' voices from the areas that were closed off for flooding. These areas were literally inaccessible because of 10 or so feet of water. On one occasion, as I was leading my tour through these caves, I heard a very close friend of mine ask me, "Hey, would you mind coming over here and helping me?" From a closed-off area, the room was dark, half flooded, and it seemed that even the people on near knew that. I could see the color leave their faces. We had explained to people thoroughly that some areas were literally inaccessible due to flooding beforehand. Against my better judgment, I left my group, I made sure the lights were bright, and I decided what was done: wet pants. I went in and swept the light around, but when I say this room is massive, I mean it. The largest in the tour cave. I heard one slosh, and that was just about all I could justify being around for. The water was dark and cold, and the room was so vast my terrible maglite was being eaten by the dark. I made the rest of my tour fast, got back to the surface, went back to the ranger station, and asked them where my coworker was. My receptionist casually told me that he had clocked out an hour ago, before my tour even began. Another notable experience was that when I had to go down the crawl space of the museum once to get more weed whacker string. I was sitting there in this musty, cobblestone basement that spanned under this massive building from the 1800s, with a dirt floor and multiple stone columns running the length of the crawl space, trying to untangle this weed whacker string when I heard someone from farther in the basement do the cliché PSSSD. Weirdly enough, I guess I hadn't put it together yet, so I spoke back, "What do you need?" Somehow thinking it was a coworker or something. "Come back here." It was possibly the creepiest thing I have ever heard. I'm not going to give you the something sounded off and I can't explain its spiel. The reason it sounded off was because it sounded like the way crows will mimic people's speech, that low, weirdly chortling way they sound. I couldn't see who was talking to me, so I simply grabbed my weed whacker string and hurried out the crawlspace door. Shutting it definitely had that feeling of something rushing up behind it before I locked the door. When I questioned a senior ranger about the possibility, his response was, "Don't worry about it, it happens." As well as we had a weird string of finding empty baby carriages and clothes up in the trees or at the bottom of gulches, and a man that claimed he saw a mermaid in one of the local springs. And some other man who insisted on cornering me and screaming at me that the devil lived in the caves. There were also a metric ton of caves in the park that were still active, and we didn't take tours through. One I heard rumors about that apparently had crabs and other little microbes in it from the prehistoric times, eavesdropped on two university people talking to a senior. One that the local teens made out and that had a massive drop-off into a sinkhole was apparently rumored to be where Confederate gold was hidden. Another site, which contained a significant amount of pottery and arrowheads, was particularly intriguing from an anthropological perspective. These were weird times in my life, and the park, while I won't name it, had a wonderful vibe of mystery and wonder to it, although a few years later, half of the staff was laid off for selling native pottery and stuff illegally. So as you can imagine, I'm glad I moved on in time to avoid the garbage. I'm not necessarily trying to convince anyone of anything, just sharing some weird experiences. I hope you enjoy them. My mom was a nurse, and she had some pretty insane nursing-related ghost stories. One of them took place back in the early 1960s. She worked at a nun-run hospital in NYC. There was a fire, and they had to evacuate the children's wing of the hospital. All the nuns came and started carrying children out one by one. They were in a huge hurry, obviously. There was one particular old nun who did quite a bit to help and was instrumental in the whole process. She helped save a lot of babies. When they tried to thank her later, no one could find her or know her name. When they described her to one of the older nuns, they were told they had just described a woman who had passed away years ago but who had loved working with children while she was alive. On the native/indigenous note, also involving my mom, who tends to have these kinds of experiences, she once spent a weekend alone at a cottage in the woods. This place was run as a retreat center at a Catholic monastery. The cottage was on their property, and for a small payment, you could reserve it for yourself to go spend a couple of days in quiet reflection and prayer. My mom was deeply asleep one night when she said she was awakened by a hellacious racket. It sounded like people were literally standing on the roof of the cottage and stomping on it with their feet, and they were also singing and chanting. She said it scared her so badly that she simply went back to sleep. Yes, this can happen. It happened to me once too. She would have written it off as a terrible dream, but when she woke up in the morning, there were ceiling tiles on the floor. Regarding the ability to fall asleep in moments of deep terror, one night a long time ago, I was camping up in the mountains in northern New Mexico on the property of some friends of mine. They were asleep in their trailer 50 yards away. I was in a tent. In the middle of the night, I was awakened by the sound of a woman sobbing hysterically, very loudly. It was so realistic that I was in absolutely zero doubt that's exactly what it was. I was so scared that I just said, "Duck this," and went back to sleep. I don't know what it really was, but it completely jives with the legend of La Llorona, which is that long ago, a native woman had to end her children in order to keep them safe from enemies, variously Spanish soldiers, white men, or other tribes, and now she spends all eternity regretting what she's done and crying out for them. In other versions of the legend, she ends them because of some sort of jealous rage at her husband. The legend is specifically tied to the irrigation ditches, called acequias, that run through the area, one of which was very near where I was sleeping. I don't know if it was actually some kind of animal or bird, but whatever it was, I now completely understand where that legend comes from and will never doubt it. Night shift at the county jail. I was a jail nurse for about 3 years in a correctional facility that housed approximately 1,300 inmates. I worked the night shift and have had some creepy shit happen that just could not be rationally explained. I worked both booking and infirmary, but the majority of the incidents occurred in infirmary. Okay, so I was there maybe a month, not a new nurse, but new to corrections. Anyone who has spent any time in a jail will tell you that when those heavy doors slam shut, it is a very distinctive, definitive, loud sound. So to get into the infirmary, you have to have a key or be buzzed in by central control. So I'm sitting at my desk, and I hear the metal door outside my office click, like someone from Central has unlocked it, and it opens about halfway and then just slams shut. Now in my office, there is a huge glass window so that nursing staff can see any inmates that are about to enter. So when the door slammed, I thought it was just the officers ducking around, and I jumped up and went to the window, and no one was there. I called Central, and the officer that answered sounded like I just woke him from a sound sleep, and I said, "Ha, ha, very funny." He had no idea what I was talking about. And I knew this officer, and I was surprised that he would go along with any type of prank because, frankly, he was kind of a jerk-off with absolutely no sense of humor. So I just thought it was some mechanical glitch. I sat down, and everything just, changed. It felt colder, and I felt like I was being watched. I was just all around uncomfortable. I removed my stethoscope from my neck, placed it on the desk, and then left my office to enter the medical department. I stayed in medical for a few, talking to the staff in there, and then went back to my office. When I walked in, I went to grab my stethoscope off the desk to check an inmate, and it wasn't there. I looked on the desk, on the side, and underneath. It just wasn't there. I should mention that when I left my office, I did lock the door as per protocol, and I'm the only one on shift with the key. Now I think I'm going crazy, so I start looking everywhere, and I cannot find it. Now in my office there is a large closet that holds all supplies. This is also locked, with the key being on the set of keys that I carry. Anyway, later in the shift I needed to go into the closet and get something, I really don't remember what, and sitting in the middle of the floor is my stethoscope. I picked it up, and the heavy metal door outside my office clicked again, opened halfway, and slammed shut. I locked the closet, locked my office, and went out for a smoke. I was scared shitless, but I had responsibilities and patients to look after, so I went back in. And I swear, the whole atmosphere felt lighter. It was warmer, and I just felt more comfortable. After my shift, the central officers rewound the tapes for me, and I saw the doors just open and slam shut, with not a single person near them or in the hallway. I wish I could say that was the last time that happened or that I got comfortable with it. I did not, because each time it happened, it seemed that the door slammed harder, and that uncomfortable feeling lasted longer and longer, and it felt almost like being stalked. Things that went missing were found in different parts of the jail. My pen case is in the women's wing. My med sheets are in the solitary central control room, and my portable blood pressure cuff is in the kitchen. Every time something of mine appeared in another part of the jail, the officers and I would check the tapes and find no one. Remember I said I felt like I was being stalked? Well, that's because all these things happened to me, but no other nurse worked nights. Not one other nurse who worked on my days off had any doors click or open or slam shut. Their stuff didn't disappear and then reappear somewhere else. It was just me. Every officer and every one of the medical staff who worked there well before I got there swore up and down that this type of incident never, ever occurred before. I reached a point where I no longer stayed in my office. Instead, I would gather all the necessary items for my shift and sit at the officer's desk. I did that until I left there and got another job. I haven't had anything like that happen again. I once worked on this construction site. It was mostly done. They had the fire alarm system up and running and some drywall work to do on some of the rental units. There were a total of 6 floors. It was only me in the entire building. One night I was patrolling the parkade. There were 2 levels, and it was underground parking. I was checking out the second level when suddenly the fire alarm went off. It shook me to the core. I was panicking, and my heart rate was through the roof. I ran as fast as possible to the main floor panel, hoping the building did not catch on fire. It said about a smoke detector on the 4th floor. I go climb up the stairs, check the unit out, and there's absolutely nothing. There was no heat, no fire, and no smoke present. The room was kept in the same way I found at the start of the shift. I was sure there was nobody inside the building, but the empty hallways kind of gave me the creeps. This was dead at night around 2 a.m. I was shivering and sweating from fear. It was winter that time, so I ran down the stairs, went outside, and called 911 right away. The FD guys came over, and I showed them the place around. They found nothing and reset the fire panel. The situation remained peaceful for several hours until 4 a.m. Alarms went off again. Check the panel, and it's the same place. This time I was scared as hell to go up there, but I still went up there and saw nothing. So I came down and called up dispatch. Told them everything about this. They told me to park the car in the courtyard and monitor the place from my car. 2 hours later my shift was over, fortunately. I explained to the construction manager what was going on, and he took over from there. After that incident, I worked there for about 4 more months. Walking around the empty hallways at midnight always gave me a chill. I sometimes felt like someone was watching me even though there was not a single soul inside the building except me. I work security, primarily overnights. A couple of months ago, they tasked me with patrolling a construction site. Construction was for some apartment complexes. I work a 9-hour shift, primarily patrolling the perimeter to prevent theft of tools, metal, copper wire, and other items. Throughout the night, there was a building in the back, and whenever I walked near it, I got a really weird feeling. I checked the other buildings earlier in the night for fence-hopping intruders. This was the last building I had to patrol before finishing out the shift with a few more walks of the perimeter. This site had no electricity. Since it was an overnight shift and there were no installed lights, I instinctively carried a flashlight. When I stepped into the first room of this building, my flashlight began flickering. Not going fully out, but darkening and then coming back up. I got chills but had to finish clearing the building in order to carry on with my night. The light dimming got more intense until I was on the 3rd and final floor, when my light simply just went out. I quickly got down to the ground floor, where I had been leaving my bag, in order to replace my batteries, but as I got off the building stairs, my light came back on. I resumed my perimeter patrols, but the light continued to flicker. Decide I'm not having it. To the far eastern side of the site, there are no buildings, just some construction crates and a few vehicles. I found a spot to sit away from the looming presence and stayed for an hour and a half, feeling nothing but fear. I have always been skeptical of supernatural occurrences and things, but the moment I set foot into the building, the only thing I felt until I left that site was a cold, gut-wrenching terror. After the hour and a half of sitting, I had to use the restroom. Being a construction site, they only really had a porta-potty available. The porta-potty was conveniently located near the building. I mustered up the courage and went to that part of the site. I took care of my business, but as I went to open the door, I heard a low hum. It sounded as if a fly was buzzing in my ear. The porta-potty door faced the opposite building when I opened it. The site was dimly lit on the ground in front of me. Look around the side to see a light pouring out of the third story of this almost completely unbuilt building. It wasn't a flashlight. It was overhead from a room on the third floor. Once again, this site has no electricity. I ran to the eastern side as fast as I could and sat back down on my bench, the whole time my light dimming and coming back up to brightness rapidly. Make it back to my bench, sit down, and look back. The building in question is in the far west corner, and there are 6 or 7 buildings between that one and myself, so I feel a little less panicked and start calming myself down. I only have an hour and a half left in my shift, and I intend to spend it all sitting right here, regardless of whether I have to move to avoid that part of the site. I just stare in that direction for what feels like hours. 25 minutes before my shift ends, I hear what sounds like running on the steps. Keep in mind these places are barely built, and when I say steps, I really mean a shitty makeshift set of stairs held together mostly by plywood and a few tall pieces of wood. They literally shake when you walk on them, so someone running would probably make these things collapse. I hear it on the stairs of the buildings closest to me, but there is no movement. Things grow quiet. 10 minutes before the shift ended, all 4 windows facing me started to beam light from overhead. Once again, it wasn't a flashlight, but rather it was as if the lights in the apartment were actually turned on in the roof. It goes without saying that I departed early that day. They put me back on the site twice more that week, and I refused to enter that back building. It now has lights coming on throughout the night. There is no electricity available, nor are any lights installed. After speaking with a supervisor and stating that the site makes me uncomfortable for no particular reason, I no longer have a scheduled appointment there. It was undoubtedly the scariest experience of my life. Horrifying night shift experience. I used to work night shifts as a security guard at the local port. It was haunted. Believe me. Anyway, every night, we had to go to our patrol rounds around the whole perimeter and check every single office. The rounds usually lasted about 1 hour to 1 hour and 30 minutes. The place was huge, 2-mile radius, and even with 2 of us on the rounds, it would still take us a while. My coworker, Mike, had called in sick that night. So, I went on my patrol rounds alone. As for the lieutenant, he stayed at the front gate post, watching his anime and cameras. Around 2 a.m., I had finished the outdoor round in the truck. Sometimes we used a 4-wheeler or a bike. So, after finishing the outside round, I would have to go inside of every single building and check the offices to make sure no office employee stayed overnight and, in case there's an intruder or trespasser on the property. The buildings were really dark inside. The maintenance man would shut off the breakers in the box right before he'd leave. Unfortunately, security did not have access to those keys. Therefore, I had to use my flashlight to light up the hallways and offices. The offices alone were creepy and haunted enough due to the old age. The fact that I had to walk around those buildings alone in the dark creeped me the duck out. It's so dead quiet in there that you could hear my steel-toe boots echo through the hallways. The next part is a blur because I began to get chills and hyperventilate, so, as I was walking through the dark office hallways, I began to hear a scratching-like sound on the walls right next to me. I stopped to listen, but the nails stopped as well. I thought it was probably just me. So I continue walking, and I stopped dead in my tracks because the scratching sounds begin to get louder this time. I knew that it was nothing normal, but rather something evil/demonic toying with me because this isn't the first time something this freaky has happened to me there, and I had just come out of those offices. There wasn't anyone in there. At this point, my heart is racing, and I'm right in the middle of the building with the nearest exit being on the other side of the building. Next, I hear pounding on the wall, and I begin to sprint out on adrenaline. The pounding followed me to the end of the hallway. This put me on edge for the rest of the night. When I entered another hallway, it stopped. It sounded huge, and I tried calling the lieutenant to report it, but the phone signal in the offices was complete trash. I didn't even bother to finish the round because I was almost going to pass out from anxiety. I went back to the front gate and wrote a report on it. I didn't even write a report on my other experiences, but I was getting fed up with it. So for the first time in my life, I wrote a report on the paranormal. No, I don't believe it was something logical because those punches were unbelievably loud. Like, whatever was banging on the wall was not human. I mean, I couldn't even stomp that loud if I tried. I walked past a cemetery at 3 a.m. So I'm walking to my new job at FedEx, and my dumbass didn't realize I had to walk past a cemetery. Mind you, my shift is from 4 a.m. to 9 a.m. I've walked past many cemeteries in my life. I'm 21, BTW. So I had a pretty lit up highway on my left, and on my right was a large cemetery. No cars, no people, just me. As I kept walking, I started feeling uneasy about the vibes. It wasn't fear, nor was I scared, but it was dreadfulness and sadness overall. And to make matters worse, I completely didn't realize it was 3 a.m. at that time. I tried to look straight forward and not acknowledge the fact that I had a cemetery 6 feet away from me just engulfed in complete darkness, but I couldn't. And I can't explain really what I felt, but it was awful, like a heavy feeling of sadness, but it felt cold. After walking for 20 straight minutes and realizing I had another 15 minutes, I decided to just go back home. As I started walking back, I started hearing the grass rustling as if someone was following me. Honestly, I think my mind was playing tricks, but the whole time I felt like I was being watched. I've had a good amount of paranormal encounters in my life, so I'm familiar with this feeling, and I just felt so afraid at that point. I just wanted to share this experience with everyone because this really has me emotionally distressed. Feel free to share your experiences. Closing time: you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. I began working a few weekly at my local bar about 6 months ago. It's an old, cozy little pub, think carpeted floor, that old pub scent, little Irish trinkets everywhere, and a few Guinness drinkers lining the bar every night. There is an older clientele in the bar, I get to control the music on my shift, and there is always a pleasant, friendly atmosphere. It also pays very well, and I enjoy the banter with the locals and the odd tourists who might wander in from a nearby hotel. Being such an old building, when you are closing up on your own at the end of a shift, a deep sense of unease tends to creep in. What was a fun place to be with music and lively chatter swiftly became full of shadows and creepiness. First, the lights are switched off in the beer garden and the customer bathrooms, no big deal. Then the lights in the lounge behind the main bar are to be switched off right before you leg it out of the building. Last night, this is the part of the closing shift where it all started to go downhill. I lifted the used beer mats from the tables before wiping them down. I had already switched the music off, and the silence was unnatural to my ears after 8 solid hours of 70s and 80s tunes being played at a decent volume. Gathering the beer mats and my cleaning supplies, I turned to head to the main bar. I flicked the light switch to off and on, and in the time it took for me to walk down the 2 steps, I heard someone from behind me, someone very clearly and very definitely, clear their throat. Immediately I was frozen to the spot. My legs refused to work. I knew the bar was completely empty and had been for the last 15 minutes or so. I also knew I had checked the bathrooms. It had rained profusely all evening, so the beer garden didn't have a single patron all night, so there was zero chance of someone still lurking around after hours. I knew I had to turn to take a look, but I really felt as though my heart had fallen directly to my ass. My skin felt as though it was crawling with nerves, and I just knew that whatever made that sound from behind me had bad intentions. Still, I put down the spray bottle of disinfectant and slowly turned to face the lounge. There, in the dark, in a chair, was a lady who absolutely hadn't been a customer of mine all evening. Even in the dark and in the shadows of the room, I could make out that she was extremely thin and gaunt in her advancing years. Her eyes seemed to glow out at me with all I can describe as absolute hatred. I could sense the anger radiating from her, and it terrified me. I began to shake with fear, and the beer mats in my hand landed on the floor. I managed to squeak out a very shaky, "Hello?" In response, I got an irate-sounding moan and grunt. Not like the moans and groans from someone who had perhaps taken a little bit too much from the top shelf and wanted to be left to sleep it off in the corner of the bar. Rather, this was the sound of someone who couldn't speak but wanted to convey their outrage. "Hello, I'm sorry, but it's home time. Do you have a taxi organized, or I can call one for you?" This was a silly thing for me to say, but I didn't know how else to respond. I began to doubt myself. Did I miss this person somewhere? Had she been passed out in the corner by any chance? But deep down I knew. I knew this was Mrs. Taylor. Mrs. Taylor had been the pub landlady a long time ago. About 50 years ago. And she was a hardline lady, by all accounts. If she didn't like or trust you, she didn't want you anywhere near the place. She hated other women with a burning passion, and she wouldn't allow any females into the bar without a male chaperone. I, as a single, 20-something-year-old who enjoyed the odd glass of wine and shot of tequila and was into loud rock music, most assuredly wouldn't have been allowed to set foot into the bar. There had been stories of the place being haunted and previous barmaids being scared out of their wits by ghostly movements, but I had always shrugged it off as nonsense. I took a step back when I got no response. The person I assumed to be Mrs. Taylor began to move. She placed a bony hand on the arm of the chair and rose up. In a surprisingly speedy and youthful way, she began towards me, letting out the most foul, high-pitched, and intense scream I had ever heard. Like the sound one would imagine the banshee gave out. I lost it. I turned on my heels and ran for the main door. I left my bag on the counter and ran for my life, completely forgetting about anything else. The only good thing is that the main door locks behind you, so there was no need to lock up. I don't know why she appeared to me, and I don't know how I will face going back there for my shift in 3 days' time. How do I explain all this to the boss without sounding like a crazy person? Wish me luck. Former jail deputy saw a ghost at work during night shift. Disclaimer, I'm not the best storyteller, but I'm not here to dramatize or exaggerate a spooky story either. Just thought I'd give my real experience. Not anything super crazy, but I hope this is the right place to share it. After I graduated last May, I decided to take up a job at my local jail. Nothing long term, just figured I'd work a year and save up some cash before college. Flash forward a little bit, and I'm only a few weeks into training. I've always liked the idea that ghosts really existed, but at that point, I really couldn't say I ever actually saw one. However, that all changed while taking post one night. The time was a little after 5 a.m., and I was sitting behind my desk, absolutely bored to tears. So, being a good little deputy, I was spinning around in my chair, honestly trying not to fall asleep. This was hour 11 of a 12-hour shift, so I'm just killing time before I get to go home. Now, to give you a little visual of where I am, I'm in a big giant room with a bunch of cells. At one end of the room is the officer's desk with big windows behind it. These windows are super reflective, so officers can look into the pod from the hallway, but inmates can't look out into the hallway from inside the pod. At the other end of this pod are all the cells. This particular pod has some cells that were behind a second pane of glass. Still with me? Because this is important, I promise. Anyways, I'm spinning around in my chair at my desk and happen to glance up at the reflective windows behind the desk. As I do, some movement catches my eye upstairs. There is someone walking around upstairs. I'm haunted. So I immediately get my corporal on the horn and tell her excitedly that I saw a ghost, but things don't end there. After that, I was bragging to anyone and everyone about my little encounter, with some mixed reactions. My sergeant says he doesn't really believe in ghosts. But some deputies told me they've definitely seen some paranormal stuff on duty too. However, it's what the sergeant on day shift shared that has really stuck with me. He told me that they had an inmate ended himself in that same pod a few years prior. I had already been told that by a few people who've been there a while. I gave a description of the guy I saw, and we decided to look up the inmate just to see if they looked the same. It was him. It was definitely the guy I saw walking around upstairs. Right down to his skinny face and the billy goat beard, there was no mistaking it. I've talked to some inmates about it, and I've had more than one tell me that sometimes they can see/hear someone walk by their cells and peeking in at the late hours of the night. It can't be a correctional officer they're talking about, because they're always wearing an orange jumpsuit. Well, that's my spooky experience. I didn't really have any notable encounters after that, but I'd be pleased to answer any questions any of you might have. But I hope you found this intriguing. Prison night shifts. I'm a prison officer, not a storyteller, so this may be either really long and boring or full of information that's irrelevant. We start our nights at approximately 8 p.m. and are locked in until the following morning at 6 a.m. It's essentially a skeleton crew and several hundred prisoners secured behind their doors. This week just gone has been the most active that I have ever experienced, and a lot of my colleagues who worked had spooky happenings as well. I'm not really a believer per se, however, a lot of spooky, unexplained stuff happens at night that I have no choice but to begin to believe when it's all added up together. At night, we usually patrol 2 linked wings, as there's no need to have staff patrolling each wing when the prisoners are asleep. There's a wing that I believe is haunted. On the 3 landing, when cutting in between the 2 wings, there's a sudden feeling of being watched by something from the corner. It freaks me out so much, I refuse to cut through there now as I just feel cold and watched. I go the longer way round to access that particular landing if I have to answer a cell bell. It's the same on the ones landing on the same wing. As soon as you come down the stairs and turn to carry on the patrol, Therese, another horrible oppressive feeling of being followed that gives me the heebie-jeebies. I have had emergency cell bells, used by prisoners to alert staff to an emergency, go off on cells that are not occupied, random doors slam when all the doors, apart from toilet, staff room, and office doors, are locked for obvious reasons, and I thought I'd seen movement on CCTV cameras when I was on my own. I've also heard things, however, anyone who has either been in prison or worked in one will know they are noisy even at night. I have never said anything about this to colleagues because being a prison officer dealing with hardened criminals and being spooked by nothing is a surefire way to get the mick taken out of you. Fast forward to this week, luckily, I was not on this wing and was a member of staff that walks around supporting patrolling staff. I spooked a patrol on a random wing as they didn't hear me, and I joked about whether they thought I was a ghost. We got talking about ghosts and stuff, and naturally the subject of this wing came up. My face must have said it all because they said, "Don't tell me the threes as you cut through and the ones as you come off the stairs." This is spooky that someone else has felt the same, but also a little bit relieving that it's not just me who feels it. I carried on with my rounds and chatting with people and got talking about my good jump scare in our chat. It turns out that a lot of people who work in prisons believe in ghosts after working night shifts. One of the patrols told me that they almost called me to sit with them as they heard a loud bang as though it was a cell door slamming shut. They went and investigated, and nothing. They had just sat back down, and it went again. This obviously spooked them. We began talking about how it's weird that ghosts have been mentioned and that happens. He then had his own story about the wing I think is haunted, where one of the metal security gates slammed shut behind him on the third landing as he was cutting through one night. Now, having worked on this wing, that gate doesn't move on its own as it's heavy, let alone slam behind anyone of its own accord. We have a laugh about being blokes and scared of shadows, and I crack on with seeing the next person. To access them, I have to go through a wooden door and a metal gate. It's pitch black, and I don't have my torch, so I open the wooden door and then the metal gate and step in to look for the light switch so I can see to lock the door and gate behind me. As I'm doing this, the wooden door slams shut directly behind me with a huge force. I jumped. It wasn't a windy night, and we were indoors, so there was no breeze or anything. Let me tell you, I've never shut some doors and gates so fast in my life so I could nope the duck out of there. I spend my rounds talking about the ghosts and seeing what everyone's stories are, and there are some interesting stories, but everyone I speak to talks about this haunted wing, and either the threes, where they feel like they are being watched, or the ones, as they come off the stairs, are mentioned. By this point I had spoken to 6 staff, and all of them said the same thing. That's too much of a coincidence for me. I finally go on to the haunted wing, and I'm talking to the patrol who has all the lights on for what I can now only assume is the obvious, as they have felt it too, and I swear I see someone moving on the cameras on the ones walking towards the office just before they go out of camera shot. Nothing there and nothing on the playback. When I was working in a big city as an embalmer, I would have to go to nursing homes quite often. One occasion that sticks out among the rest was when my shift partner and I went down to a particular nursing home that was on the lower end in price. Most of the residents were Mexican, and I remember picking up a little old lady who had passed on. Nothing out of the normal yet. But her roomie was a different story. She had icons, candles, and idols of La Santa Muerte, Holy Death, all on her side of the small room that they shared. I remember her reciting short prayers while we wrapped her roommate in a sheet to move her into our cot. When my partner and I walked back out to the hallway to leave, a nurse was standing completely still down a ways, staring at us. When we noticed she was necessarily looking at us but at what was behind us, we both looked over our shoulders. At the end of this hall was the dining area, and what I can only describe as a dark, smoky, static-like figure was sitting down at one of the tables. It was early in the morning, around 3 or 4 o'clock, and normally no one was in the dining area. The 3 of us just watched the figure for what seemed like maybe 2 to 3 minutes until it disappeared slowly. Needless to say, my partner and I hightailed it out of there while the nurse called security. I was the superstitious one out of us both, so once we got back in our van, I pulled out my icon of St. Michael and started reciting prayers while my partner laughed and talked about how crazy the whole thing was. Freakiest night yet in my career. I work in a care home in the UK and work nights. I thought I'd share a few of the ghostly things I've seen and heard because the spirits at work seem to love to scare me senseless. I used to work evenings. It started with just footsteps behind me, particularly when I was on my own. Then they started scratching my head and tapping it. I then changed to night shifts, and certain spirits started popping up that all night staff have seen. About a year ago, as I walked down a staircase, I noticed a corridor to my right leading to a dead end. I looked down the corridor, and I saw a figure. She was almost glowing. She was so white she had no face and very straggly hair. She was peeping out of a doorway of a bathroom. I could only see her head and upper body. Although she had no face, it felt like she was watching me. I turned to call for my coworker, but when I glanced back, she had vanished. She doesn't bother me too much, she seems like a nice spirit, and I've never worried about seeing her again. Another spirit is what staff call the shadow man. He lurks behind people and in corners. He only gets very close to one staff member, who I regularly work with. I've only seen him at the front entrance. I froze, and so did he. Anyway, one night I and this one coworker were doing the cleaning in the corridor with all the living rooms. We were standing there having a rant about general stuff that was annoying us. For context, the spirits never liked us being negative. As we were ranting, All the living rooms started making really loud noises, all at once. I felt brave and told them to shut up. I turned away from the noise, and this one coworker told me the shadow man was behind me. I didn't look, so I don't know if he was, but the noise quieted down because we'd stopped our discussion, but when we started up again, it started as well. Other shorter stories include the time I heard a man shout "help me" while we were in a corridor full of sleeping ladies. Another time was when I was walking out of the kitchen and all the cutlery started banging around. I ran so fast and refused to be in that kitchen once it was dark outside. Another is the people we see sitting in chairs in our peripheral vision, but when we look, nobody's there. Then there's whistling that happens so close to us, but we have to pretend not to hear it because it feels really wrong. Another time, while sitting alone in the staff room, I heard someone whisper my name in my ear, but I chose to ignore it. Then when I'm in the laundry room, I can hear things in the corridor like walking frames even when everyone is asleep. And another time there was screaming upstairs, and we couldn't find the source. It was like when we went to one end of a corridor, it screamed on the opposite side, and then we'd be going back and forth without finding the person screaming. On another shift we were sat in the staff room at around 5 a.m., and there was a walking stick sound in the corridor. We went out to see if someone was awake, they weren't. One night, I and another care worker are doing normal resident assistance, and we're both working with one person. I suddenly start hearing banging noises, but my other coworker couldn't hear it. At first I ignored it after my coworker said she didn't hear anything and summed it up to an overactive imagination. It then began getting louder, and I turned to my coworker and said someone must be breaking in. She told me to look out the front window as there's a view to the main entrance. Nobody was there. Again I tried to ignore it. When we left this particular room, we decided to go up the corridor, and then we passed the bathroom. I previously said I saw a peeping woman. The door was closed this night. Suddenly the door starts banging really loud and shaking. We ran back down the corridor as we were scared. All alarms were on doors, so we knew no resident was awake. I still have no idea what was in that bathroom. Another night I was on shift again walking down that same corridor with a staff member. We had done our hourly checks on all residents and suddenly started hearing on a loop, "Help me, help me, help me," in a woman's voice. At first we think it's a resident and instantly start checking rooms again. Nobody is awake, but we can still hear "help me." It was after checking rooms that we listened closely, and neither of us recognized the voice. We didn't leave each other's side all night. I left the care home temporarily about 3 months ago and can go back at any point, but it's so scary. Due to my poor writing skills, I can't convey how scary this place is. It bothers me that they know my name and target night staff. I've always wondered what's in the home and how aware they are. The roommate that worked as a nurse had 5+ nurses witness a paranormal event. My old roommate is a nurse. One night she came home and told me the craziest story. For context, she was a totally normal person, a little spiritual but nothing out of the ordinary. She says they had an indigenous, native Canadian, patient in her wing that was on the decline. She said they were there for about a week before they suddenly passed during the night. A couple of days later, the nursing station gets a ping from the room the patient died in. The bed they were in was empty for days after they passed, but the ping was coming from that bed. The nurse picked up the phone and said she could hear rhythmic chanting and drums, like a classic indigenous song. She called over the other nurses and put it on speaker, and everyone was there listening to the chanting over the phone. Obviously they were freaked out, and they sent someone to go check out the room, but it abruptly stopped. The bed was empty, and the only other patient in the room was asleep. To my knowledge, that phone line is inaccessible to the public. To this day this story freaks me out, as my roommate isn't the type of person to just make things up. She's been with a lot of patients when they pass away, and she says she can feel the energy shift when they finally pass. Does anyone that has worked in a hospital have any similar stories? Late night shift. My parents moved after I got into college, and I was home for my first summer after college. I had been applying to a bunch of jobs but got nothing, so I just went to a temp agency. I got a 2-week temp job at the HQ of a huge company. It was a pretty relaxed job. I came in about 5 in the afternoon, everyone would leave, and then it would just be me, 2 older IT people who shared an office with me, and a security guard. My job was to take these reports that were set to print off throughout the night and have them ready on people's desks in the morning. The building was giant and pretty old, so it took some getting used to finding my way around it. I really only did about 15 minutes of work per hour until around 11, when I just let the reports pile up. On my second week there, I went out to deliver the last load of reports for the night. The 2 IT guys were in the office when I left. The security guard was reading at the front door. I had to pass through the accounting department at one point, and here's where it started getting scary. The accounting department was essentially a very long hallway with offices on either side. As I round the corner to head down the hallway, I notice a large man in a suit walking very quickly. It was around 3 in the morning, so this was quite unusual. I waved at him and inquired about his well-being. He gave me no response and just kept on coming down the hall. I became extremely anxious and positioned myself near the printer to wait for his arrival. However, he never came by, which confused me further, as there was really nowhere he could have gone. On my way back across the building, I saw the security guard in the same place as before. Both of the IT guys were still in the office as well and swore they hadn't left. As it happens, my dad works in the accounting department at the company. I told him about it and asked if anyone had died at the office. He told me there had been 3 people who had heart attacks and died there. Haunted Dollar Tree. I worked as an assistant manager at Dollar Tree with my boyfriend, who stocked the shelves. Now dating employees was not allowed, but we were in love and young and too irresponsible to care. Since it was Christmas time, my manager had started giving out graveyard shifts to put out more stock and fill the shelves in time for Christmas. My boyfriend, our coworker Jacob, who is around our age, and I had all taken this opportunity because it meant more hours, and we wouldn't have to work in the daytime during the Christmas rush. We would get there at 9 just as the store closed, and the closing assistant manager and cashier would finish their nightly tasks and leave at 9:30. The first couple of shifts were fun. We blasted music throughout the aisles and ordered pizza on our breaks. One night around 12 a.m., we were each in our different aisles filling the shelves when the row of lights in my aisle and the row above the tills shut off. I glanced down my aisle, where I was able to see the main door and light switch. Who did that? Stop messing around, guys, I said in annoyance. These two were a handful together, always joking around and messing with each other's boxes. That wasn't me, I exclaimed as I turned to see my boyfriend approaching. Wasn't me either, Jacob announced as he joined us. Weird, maybe it runs on a timer to save power, I thought to myself as I walked to the front of the store. I froze for a second in shock when I noticed the switch was flicked down, meaning someone or something must have turned it off. I quickly turned the lights on and walked back to Jacob and my boyfriend. It was flicked off. What? What do you mean? Jacob asked, almost not comprehending them shutting off by themselves. I forgot to mention I've talked with my store manager before, and she has let me know she believes this store is haunted. She has experienced strange things in her time working there and wanted to let me know to be careful and not anger them. Me still being skeptical, I tried thinking of a reasonable explanation for all that happened, but the lights, how could they have flicked off themselves? The lights did this once again later in the night, and I just flicked them on, questioning if it was them this time. It wasn't. As our shifts continued, so did the things we experienced overnight in that store. The lights flicking off became a routine, and we would just turn them back on. Other things started happening, more than just the lights. We all walked towards the back room, ready to start cleaning up and sweeping the floors, when a display box of head massagers fell from the top shelf in one of the aisles. We tidied the mess only for it to happen again 20 minutes later, this time bringing another display box with it. While walking to meet the boys in our break room one night, I walked in through the 2 huge white doors leading to the back room, and a will came falling down from the top of the door, just missing my head. Hey! That's not funny. Are you guys trying to kill me? I yelled to them as I ran up the stairs. My boyfriend looked over to me and asked, what do you mean? Who put that will on the top of the door? Show me. I lead my boyfriend back to the white doors while Jacob followed cautiously behind. I showed them the wheel. It was small and had a dense metal clip on it. It came down from up there. I pointed to the ledge at the top of the door. I didn't do that. You could have died if that hit you. My boyfriend said in a panicked voice. He held on to me and then led me to the break room while everyone tried to calm down and had some pizza. The next morning my boyfriend insisted I bring this up to the manager, so I did. She decided to add another assistant manager, one that was older than us all, and she was hoping it would calm our worries and push out more stock. We were unaware that this would be our final graveyard shift. It started off fine. We all picked an aisle and worked away listening to all our own music through our headphones. Suddenly the lights had turned off, but not the front lights or the lights on aisle 1. Aisles 2, 4, and 6 were shut off. The only way you could get to those light switches was through the electrical room, and the only ones with the keys were my fellow assistant manager and me. Oh no, why? I sighed as my boyfriend rushed to my side. We investigated the electrical room and noticed 3 switches were off while the others remained on. I hope this doesn't get worse, I say, locking the electrical room now that I've turned the lights on. Things continued falling off the shelves at random points in the night. We just put them back and continued working. It was time to go, and I had shut all the lights off and locked the door. As I quickly locked up, not wanting to set off the alarm I had just set, I looked up and noticed a single light was on in the center of the store. At first I was confused. I had made sure all the lights were shut off, and we even walked through the darkness to get to the main doors. I let out a deep sigh as I turned to see my coworkers and boyfriend getting into my vehicle waiting to be driven home. "I'll be 1 second," the light turned back on. I unlocked the door and felt a presence behind me. Thank God it was my boyfriend. No, don't go back in, just leave it," he begged me. "No, I don't want to get in trouble." I walked through the doors and turned off the alarm. I walked with a fast pace, trying to turn the lights off, then run out of there. I heard footsteps behind me and saw my boyfriend and Jacob walking down the aisle. I could also see the other assistant manager peering through the locked main doors. I unlocked the door and began opening it when my boyfriend gasped and ran to the front. What's wrong?" I said confused. "Nah, no way. I don't get paid enough to deal with this shit," Jacob announced and ran after my boyfriend. I quickly turned the lights off and ran after them. What is it? What happened?" I questioned, but they were already leaving the door. I set the alarm as fast as I could and attempted to lock the gate, but I heard a huge crash. Fear radiated throughout my whole body. The sound had come from inside the store close by. After locking the gate, I shoved the door closed and locked it as well. I broke into a sprint to my car and jumped into the driver's seat. Everyone glanced at each other, panting. "What did you guys see?" My boyfriend turned his body toward me and explained how he had seen a figure of a man. I looked toward my other coworkers and watched as they described the same thing. While my boyfriend and Jacob followed me to turn off the lights, they had noticed a tall, dark figure peering behind one of the aisles at us. They had noticed it while I walked with my head down right towards the thing as I flipped through my keys. The other assistant manager could see it through the doors and called to us when she did. Before I locked the gate, glancing at all of them with even more worried looks on their faces, I heard something close by, like a large bang, but it lasted for at least a couple seconds. It was really loud. I grabbed a hold of my boyfriend as he squeezed me tightly. What if it was charging at her? "It's tried to hurt her before," he questioned, looking at the others with deep concern. We agreed that we would bring this up with our manager, and she had understood. Having her own experiences in mind, she canceled graveyards after that night, and within the next 2 months, I would be quitting. Since then, I often wonder how the store is now. If the new manager knows about these happenings or not. I wonder if graveyard shifts would ever be scheduled again there. If so, would those workers experience what I did? What had they seen? In 2009, I was a rookie assistant nurse in training at the pediatrics, so I was checking 4 lines and doing really basic work. After a few months, I went on night shift because it paid more money. It was an old hospital, built about 110 years ago. It was enormous because it received all the people from surrounding rural areas. The maternity ward was fused with pediatrics. The south wing was pediatric, the north wing was obstetric. This will be relevant later on. There was room for about 100 people, but it was never fully occupied. Now to the story. After an uneventful week or so working there, a lot of mothers got cleared and sent home, and the place was empty. While I was doing paperwork, I heard a woman crying, like how when people die, there's this type of cry of despair and pain. I got up and tried to hear the direction. It was coming from the pediatric ward, not the obstetric. It was not ICU, so I have no idea why somebody would be crying that much on a wing that had just kids with simple diseases. There were no sick babies or dead babies. It was the not a life risk part of the hospital, and these moms all had healthy babies. Also, it's not visiting time. So I go, kind of worried about what's going on, and I walk down the hall. Suddenly the noise stops. Still, I check every child, every room, count the people in them, everything okay, kids sleeping. Just as I sit down at the desk and start doing my paperwork for the night, I hear crying again from the pediatrics. Sometimes the sound just stops, fades away, and sometimes when I think I'm about to get to this person, the sound starts in the opposite direction. I always had a weird feeling just by being there. But after a couple of times checking the crying, I realize it's not from this world. I can't explain it better. I just knew then, after checking the new moms and children's rooms and realizing people were asleep or happily breastfeeding, I realized this wasn't real. But curiosity had gotten to me, and I kept hearing about it. Sometimes it was far away, sometimes it was like the next room. And it really creeped me out. Anyway, when morning came, the next shift people came, and this older nurse asked how the shift was. I said, okay, but a little noisy, and I kept hearing crying. She said, well, just ignore it if it's not one of the patients. If you follow it, you will just run left and right like a fool all night. Anyways, this would happen every now and again. Sometimes patients would complain, saying they couldn't sleep because of the crying. So I had to make up a lie saying it was from the ward above, but it was just a storage room and cables and stuff above, no patients, no nurses, nobody. Okay, time passes. I no longer work there, but I met one of the old doctors on a flight, and I chatted with him, and I just had to ask about the crying. He said that in the past the obstetric ward was the entire floor, and to the south, where now it was pediatrics, it used to be the mothers that didn't have the best luck with their babies. Most of them had lost the babies or were going to. So, I never got definite answers, but I think I understand why the crying always started on that side, although there were no adults there any longer. Marine officer terrified by ghostly encounter. This is my first time sharing, but given what I experienced so many years ago, I have finally calmed down enough to tell my story. A little backstory from 2008 to 2014, I was an officer in the United States Marine Corps. I left active duty in 2014 as a captain. In the USMC, my MOS was 0602, Command and Control Systems Officer, and I was attached to Marine Wing Communications Squadron 18 and then, for a short while, moved on to be the S6 Staff Officer of Marine Aircraft Group 36. As a U.S. Marine, my constant focus was on the real enemy. Given the time frame I was in the Marine Corps, during the surge, most of our non-stop training was counterinsurgency warfare and counterinsurgent tactics, BIDS/IEDs, etc. As such, I was always a skeptic and had zero interest or experience with anything paranormal. I had a lot on my plate. Marine Wing Communications Squadron 18 is in Camp Foster, Okinawa. As you are aware, the Battle of Okinawa in World War II was some of the worst and bloodiest fighting in the Pacific Theater. To this day, they are still uncovering unexploded ordnance, UXOs. Because of the fierce fighting, there are numerous locations that are considered off-limits to the public because of a high probability of the aforementioned UXOs. As an officer, one of my standard duties was to stand OOD, Officer of the Day, which essentially was a 24-hour post, armed with a loaded pistol, and I was charged with walking my unit's perimeter, keeping a strict logbook of events, and touring the enlisted barracks to ensure good order and discipline. At around 11 o'clock at night, I was finished with my second tour of the HQ building of MWCS 18, where my duty desk was located, and was making my way outside to walk towards one of the 3 enlisted barracks. The moment I stepped outside, however, I was hit with an outrageously and unseasonably cold blast of air that had no source or origin. It was mid-August, and in Okinawa, the only weather is hot and soupy, so I was taken by surprise to be hit with almost Arctic cold air. After my initial shock, I shook it off as being a malfunction of the AC unit in the building, and I began my walk towards the barracks. Mind you, it is dead quiet on base, and most of the Marines on base are either asleep or at the nearby smoke pit puffing on one last evening cigarette. During my walk, however, I grew vividly aware of the smell of spent brass. Now this wasn't your whiff of gunpowder, but the overwhelming smell after 300 Marines just spent the last 30 minutes expending all their ammunition. The smell of spent gunpowder is extremely unique, and you know it immediately. This sent me into search mode, and I diverted my walk to the barracks toward the more wooded area nearby, which seemed to be where the smell was the strongest. That is when I heard it. A noise that haunts me to this day. A blood-curdling scream that sounded, as best as I can describe it, wet. As if someone was attempting to scream with a mouth full of water. At first I thought it was the sound of an animal. I was logically trying to sort out what it was. Maybe one of the gigantic fruit bats that fly around Okinawa. However, again the sound came from directly in front of me in a small wooded area. Concluding immediately that this was not an animal, I instantly surmised that a violent assault was occurring nearby. Therefore, I ran full speed ahead, switched on my flashlight, and began to walk around the area, trying to figure out where or what made that noise. I searched around every single ducking tree. After about 10 minutes of searching this wooded area and not seeing anything, but still smelling the smell of spent gunpowder, I turned around with the intent to walk back to the HQ building and call military police to send some Marines over to search the area. I stopped dead in my tracks. Not 7 feet in front of me, floating off the ground, was the shape of a person but no distinguishable features, completely black, no eyes, like a shadow. Both its legs were ragged stumps. That is how I knew it was floating. It seemed to be wearing shredded clothing, but I could not tell what type of color it was. Again, everything was just black. My flashlight did not pierce it and, in fact, just highlighted its blackness even more. Today, thinking back on it, it wasn't a normal shadow color but the same color of black ink being spilled. But the most horrific thing that keeps me up at night is the eyes. Out of the shadow of this thing, where its head was, two bright white eyes flashed at me. Almost like the flash of a camera. I took 3 or 4 steps back in utter shock and tripped backwards on a tree root, never taking my eyes off this thing. I quickly looked down to grab my service pistol holstered on my side, and when I looked up, it was gone. Nothing was there. Absolutely nothing. I stood up and ran as fast as I could back to the HQ building and slammed the door shut and locked it. My assistant duty officer, a DO, usually a lance corporal or a corporal attached to the OOD so they can swap sleep shifts for this 24-hour post, was asleep, and I couldn't figure out how to tell him what the hell I just saw without looking like a lunatic. I sat at the duty desk for the rest of the night, scared shitless and not moving an inch from my seat. Hell, I don't think I even blinked. I never told anyone anything about this, fearing repercussions towards my profession, being ordered for a mental health evaluation, etc. I kept this inside of me since the day I left active duty. I have been suffering night terrors and insomnia ever since, and my health has deteriorated significantly because of it. The Black Hound of Dakota Avenue. Location, St. Cloud, Florida. Date, September 2019, I think. I consider myself a skeptical person, and while fascinated by the paranormal, I truly believe there are reasonable explanations for strange phenomena. Once I thought I saw a UFO over East Lake Tahoe, but upon further investigation, I realized it was a meteor shower and the space rocks had iron in them, giving off a green glow. It was September 2019 when I encountered what I have since dubbed the Black Hound of Dakota Avenue. I spotted this creature not just once but on 2 separate occasions about a week apart. To give you some context, at the time I was working a closing shift at a call center in Orlando, meaning I'd get off around midnight and make it to St. Cloud around 12:45 1 a.m. At the time I had a wonderful German Shepherd Husky mix named Rex, who has since passed away, but I would leave him with my parents, who live off Old Canoe Creek, while I was at work. After work I'd stop at my parents and pick him up, then I'd drive down Old Canoe Road and cross 192 to the state streets where I'd turn left onto 10th Street towards my house, a few blocks from Lakeview Elementary. I've lived in St. Cloud all my life. I've driven this route countless times before and countless times since. It was closer to 2 a.m. on the night I first saw the Shadow Hound. I got stuck on a particularly long call and was late getting off work. I just picked up Rex from my parents and turned off Vermont on the 10th. Between Dakota and California Avenue, there is an alleyway between the houses. The properties on both sides have large and solid fences. Occasionally I see a truck or random car parked in there. There is a bus stop bench at the corner entrance to the alley with a street lamp that's well lit. Across from the alleyway is an empty lot with a large tree toward the back corner but otherwise a very wide open field. In other words, this was a well-lit area with not a lot of options for an animal to scamper off to without me seeing where they went. As I'm driving down the road, I see a large black dog standing in the middle of 10th Avenue completely illuminated by a halo of light from the street lamp. My headlights reflected off the dog's eyes, a pale blue-green like a normal dog, nothing eerie like red eyes glowing like embers of hellfire. With the street lamp and my own headlights, I was able to get a good look at the creature. Now I'm a dog lover and a member of several local pet groups, and my first job out of high school was at a pet store here in St. Cloud back in 2013, so I know a thing or two about dogs, which is why I noticed so many details about what it looked like. It looked like a mastiff of some sort, looking almost like Fang from the Harry Potter franchise, a Neapolitan mastiff, but its wrinkles and jowls weren't quite as prominent. Perhaps it had some bully breed in it or was a cane corso, another mastiff with slightly less prominent cheek flaps. When I say it was a black hound, I don't mean it was as if oil or pure shadow coalesced into the form of a dog. Nothing quite so poetic or paranormal. Rather, it was a rather mundane black dog. It had either dark gray or brown fur, maybe even a brindle, that appeared black in the night but still had texture still visible in the pale orange light of the street lamp. A regular dog. At this point nothing seemed paranormal to me. Sure, there was fog coming out of his mouth, but it was a cold night in September, and there was fog coming out of my mouth too, with every breath. I thought it was someone's lost dog. Its ears were not trimmed, and its tail was not docked, but it also was not skinny as if it were a stray. It was very muscular and well-fed but not obese. Having a close bond with my own dog, I know I'd be upset had it been mine, so I intended to try and coax the dog into my van so I could find its owners. Whatever its breed was, a dog of this size would be expensive even if not pedigree, therefore, I was sure they'd want it back. The dog was larger than Rex, who at the time was 65 pounds, so I'd estimate this dog was anywhere between 85 and 100 pounds, which means that getting an unfamiliar dog of that size into the car with my own dog would be risky. Rex was a great dog and got along with anyone. The only time he ever became aggressive was if another dog initiated the conflict, and even then he'd only defend himself or me. If Rex didn't feel threatened by this hound, then I knew the dog was not dangerous. I looked over at Rex, sitting in my passenger seat, to see how he was reacting to the dog. He clearly knew the dog was there, it was not a figment of my imagination. He was making soft vocalizations, not growls but more of low-toned woofs as if to say, "Who are you? I don't know you." His hackles were only slightly raised. I knew for him this meant he wasn't angry but more cautious, as if his instincts were telling him to be prepared, but he was still seeing if there was a real threat. His body language told me that he thought this was strange as well, but it wasn't dangerous, so I got out of the car. As I exited my car, I'd lost sight of the dog. At first I thought perhaps he got startled by me and ran off somewhere. I surveyed the area around me. Again, the alleyway had solid fences with no obvious gaps big enough for him to slip through, and across the street was an empty lot with an open field. The only cover in the field was some small shrubs that would never conceal a dog his size and some bushes to the far corner that he wouldn't have been able to make it to in the time I had my eyes off him. I thought he might have run around my car, almost like when dogs are playing tag and they circle around a tree or bush and antagonize another dog to chase them playfully. I walked around my car but still didn't see him. Back at the front of my car, I glance over at Rex, who is also spinning his head around side to side. He was also looking for the hound. He didn't see where it had run off to when I got out of the car. Rex's ears were down and his eyes were wide. He was very confused and didn't understand what was going on. I got on my hands and knees to take one last look under my car to see if maybe I saw his paws on the other side of the car, but there was nothing. It was a quiet night. I didn't hear any panting or the rustle of the dry September grass crunching under his paws or the clacking of his nails against the pavement or gravel of the alleyway. Wherever the dog was, he was long gone from us. I got back into my car. Still perplexed, I was still under the assumption there must be a reasonable explanation. Perhaps he was in better shape than I thought he was, or maybe I don't know how quick dogs can really move or how stealthy they can be. It seemed odd to me, but at this point I just thought, hey, it's 2 a.m., I'm exhausted after a long shift and not on top of my game. I turn on my car and start to drive away. Out of the corner of my eye, I see the dog in my rearview mirror. Now I'm startled. Like a scene from a Scooby-Doo episode, Rex and I both swing our heads around and look, and sure enough, he's standing there bold as brass. His eyes were reflecting blue-green from my taillights, and there was a red hue from my car cast on him. Rex's hackles are raised fully now, but his vocalizations were still just low growling and soft barks. He was very startled and defensive. Like Scooby to my Shaggy, Rex and I turned to look at each other to confirm we're both seeing the same thing, both our eyes wide, and we're visibly startled. We turn our heads back to the back of our car, and the dog is once again gone. At this point I stop asking questions, I turn myself around as fast as possible, and I drive home with gusto. As I drove away, I saw the dog had returned in the rearview mirror and stayed in the road for as long as I could see him. This is where things took an unexplainable turn. Even though my car was in motion, meaning my brake light wasn't on, and I was moving away from the dog, and even though the only other light source was the street lamp above the dog, his eyes continued to glow blue-green very brightly no matter how far away I got. Finally, after a few blocks, I could no longer see him, but the hairs on the back of my neck were standing straight up just like Rex's hackles. When I got home, I spent a few hours poring over local Facebook groups trying to see if anyone reported a lost dog matching the description, but I found nothing. I reviewed a bunch of folklore about black dogs, mostly from the UK, and much of it was similar but also very different. Most of the black dog stories involve proximity to a church or graveyard, but the closest church is on Tennessee Avenue, and there's no graveyard adjacent to it. The eyes were blue-green like a normal dog's, not red, and it wasn't being aggressive or intimidating. It was simply disappearing and reappearing mysteriously. Had I not had Rex with me that night, I would have passed this encounter off as a figment of my own imagination. I checked around the next day and didn't see anything at the spot. In the following days, I continued to check with local Facebook groups, pet stores, and vet offices to see if anyone had lost a dog matching the description. I talked to a friend of mine who's gone to high school with me here in St. Cloud and who was also very knowledgeable in regards to paranormal phenomena, and it puzzled her too since it was so similar yet so different from black dog legends around the world. About 2 weeks passed, and I just started to forget about the encounter when it happened again. The situation was almost the exact same, the same spot and everything. Rex was with me again, and when the dog appeared in front of us, I looked at Rex and just said, "Nope, not today," and I maneuvered my car to the side so I wouldn't hit him but simply went around him, my right tires just barely running over the grass in the empty field/lot across from the alleyway. When I looked in the rearview mirror, he was gone again. This was the last time I saw the dog. The encounters were only 2 or so weeks apart, so it's not possible for them to have occurred on nights with full moons both times. This happened in mid and late September, not exactly a period of time associated with paranormal activity, like October, for instance. 2 years have passed, and Rex has also passed on. I now have a brindle black mouth cur puppy named Ahsoka, and with her fur pattern and quiet gait, there have been many occasions where she spooks me because I didn't see her somewhere because the lights were off, and she blends into the dark so well. You'd think this makes it seem more familiar and real, as if now that I have a similar dog, I'd realize it was just a normal dog I encountered, but fatigue made me misinterpret the events. But my encounter was different from what I now experience regularly with Ahsoka. If anything, it makes the encounter with the dog more mysterious. This is what led me to finally sit down and write it all out. My memories had become blurry and faded, but I remembered I had messaged the same friend I mentioned above on the day after, recounting the tale in vivid detail about the encounter. I also remembered telling her I saw the dog a second time. I searched through our conversation history and found the messages, cross-referenced to make sure I got the streets right and the encounter's layout right, and wrote this all out. Perhaps I'm not the only one who has had a similar encounter, or perhaps someone listening to this will say, "Hey, that was when my dog ran away," in which case I say to you that your dog unintentionally frightened me to the core and made me question myself and my experiences. Despite what I believe were the appropriate measures to take to find a reasonable explanation, I still cannot. Perhaps this story will be buried in obscurity, but nevertheless I will always be puzzled by the mysterious Black Hound of Dakota Avenue. The creepiest closing shift. So to reference, I was in college, and in my senior year, it was a bit stressful all around. In order to make some extra cash so I could fund my thesis project, as I went to art school, I decided to pick up a job at a nationwide retailer that sells smelly good things, shower gels, candles, lotions, etc. What was nice about this job is that I was able to quickly move up from sales associate to a key holder, like a manager on duty, within the year. This story takes place shortly after this promotion. Another thing to note is that the mall that I worked at was an outdoor mall, and in order for employees to run trash/do shipments, every store had a door that led to a private hallway that led to the outside. This way we don't have to worry about customers, and it's a straight shot to where you need to go. So all that being said, this was one of the first nights that I was not only in charge of the store as the manager on duty but also had to close up too, including balancing the tills, getting the store ready for tomorrow, etc. My other closer had left at 9:30, which managers usually stay till 10, and I was finishing up balancing the tills, making sure all the numbers were right, counting cash, all that good stuff. Since we were closed and the doors were locked, I had my own music playing softly from my phone, since our stereo system had gone kaput earlier that day. As I'm walking back with the money from the till to the safe, I begin to hear a banging sound on our back door, the one that only employees use that customers don't know about. At first, I figured it was someone else closing up their store, trying to get in, and figured they'd stop when they took a minute to read the label on the door showing that it was our store, not the one they were supposed to be at. Nope. The banging kept going for a good 5 minutes. When I looked through the peephole when it started, I saw nothing and didn't think twice about it. And then it kept happening. As this was happening, a voice from the other side of the door was saying, "Let me in. Let me in." Getting more annoyed every time they did. Since I was the only one in the store, and knowing full well it was not the coworker that closed, as she was a lady, this was a male voice, I began to do what any 21-year-old would do, panic. Call my store manager? It's 10 p.m. at night, and she worked the day shift, she's already in bed. Call the assistant store manager? Unlikely she'll answer, and she didn't much care for me anyways. Call the store supervisor, a friend of mine? Yes. So I gave her a call, praying she'd pick up. She didn't. I proceeded to call her 2 more times in hopes that she'd answer, and nothing. I came to the realization that not only did I still have to finish any I thought, oh duh, that makes sense. He wanted to fix it while the store was closed and there were no customers so nothing could be messed with. But here's the thing, I'd worked that previous day. I never saw anyone come to our store to fix something. And the man talking to us that day had a different voice from the guy in the back hallway last night, so there's no way he could have been there yesterday to try to fix it. He said that he was the only one scheduled to work on our store, so it's not like it would have been a coworker of his. So it made me think, who the hell was trying to get into my store last night? I never did find out. My night shift nightmare. I work in hospitality, a very popular chain company here in the UK. I won't mention the name, but I can honestly say it's the best job I've ever had. I didn't think I would enjoy a job so much, especially working the night shifts. When I was being interviewed, Everything was sounding amazing until they mentioned I would be working completely alone. I have to admit that made my heart skip a beat, and I almost refused the job. But honestly, accepting the job was the best thing I ever did, and being there for nearly 2 years has proven that. I still can't believe I work there. The staff are amazing, the guests are 99.9% pleasant, and overall I'm very happy. But of course, where there's good, there is bad. Sure, I've dealt with awkward guests who came back drunk after a night out. I even had to kick out a few guests because they were being way too loud and disturbing other guests sleeping. So it's not all sunshine and roses, I admit, but that doesn't put me off my job. Until one night, when a guest made me question that very thing. It happened a few weeks ago. I arrived at my normal time to take over from evening staff. The duty manager that was working took me to one side and gave me the rundown on what happened to her and the staff that evening during dinner service. According to her, the 2 guests, a man and a woman, who were staying in room 1 were acting very strange. Apparently they stepped out to have a cigarette, but the guy was disturbing the guests who were eating dinner by slamming his entire body against the windows that looked into the restaurant, shouting profanities, and making rude hand gestures. He then disappeared for a few minutes and then came back with a fire extinguisher that he got from our bin shed. Whilst all this was happening, the duty manager stepped out and gave him a warning and told him if they disturb any more guests or attempt to destroy the hotel property again, they'll be out. Apparently the guy made some empty threatening remarks and then disappeared back into his room with his lady friend. The duty manager assured me that it's highly doubtful that the strange couple will come out of their room for the rest of the night and that everything should be okay. Oh, how wrong she was. After the duty manager and front of house staff left at around 11:15 p.m., I locked the doors and grabbed my panic button, something that the manager insists we night shift workers wear as a precaution, and although I never had to use it, I'm very glad I wore it that night. I knuckled down and got on with my duties, cleaning, setting up continental breakfast, emptying rubbish bags, counting the till, restocking juices, and defrosting pancakes, crumpets, and muffins. Little but necessary jobs. At around 1:30 a.m. I just finished mopping and getting ready to sit down to take a little break with some snacks and scroll through my phone in the restaurant area. I was just about to take a bite when all of a sudden I heard the hotel door open. It was the couple from room 1, making their way outside to have another cigarette. Going by what the duty manager told me about the guy, I didn't feel at all safe being alone in the open, so I gathered all my things and made my way to the office where I could lock myself in and keep an eye on them on the CCTV monitor. Some time went by, and the lady made her way back in, and she did not look at all well. She was walking so slowly, like she was in pain, swaying while she walked, stopping every few steps, but she managed to get back into her room from what I can see on the monitors. The guy, however, was not at all in a rush to go back to the room. He made his way back in the hotel with his key card and decided he was going to explore the restaurant area. Okay, nothing alarming. At first I thought he was looking for me, and I almost opened the door to let him know I was there, until I looked up at the monitor and there he was standing on a table and dancing. Now I know that doesn't sound at all threatening, but you have to admit, very strange behavior. So instead of opening the door, I decided to observe him for a while. For the next hour or so, his behavior went from strange to downright disturbing. As I said, he started off by just dancing on a table, then danced around the restaurant area, then made his way to the lobby area where he decided to stand very still like a statue, then a few seconds later, move position, then stand still again. Again, not very threatening. In fact, I was giggling a little just watching him do whatever the heck he was doing. But the worst was yet to come. At around 2:45 a.m. the guy was still acting strange. He was constantly going in and out of the hotel, dancing some more and jumping around. Then he decided it would be a good idea to take the condiment tray, take a seat on the chair behind the desk, and start drinking the ketchup and brown sauce. Okay, now his behavior has gone from strange to a bit concerning. I was not about to open the office and tell him he needs to stop what he's doing and go back to his room. Being a lone female worker, I wasn't about to put myself in any danger, but I wasn't in enough danger to call anybody, so again, I just watched him. As time went on, his behavior slowly went from concerning to disgusting. Around 3:25 a.m., after he finished drinking the condiments, he got up and took his shirt off and wiped away the sauce that was around his mouth. He then draped his shirt over the desk chair, walked around a little bit until he came to a complete stop, and slowly turned his head towards the office door. Now I'm scared. The way he slowly walked towards the office door, the way he made direct eye contact at the camera as if to say, "I know you're in there watching me." He pressed his body against the office door and started kissing it whilst making direct eye contact with the camera. He then started putting his hand down his shorts, and yes, He was doing exactly what you're thinking. I felt sick, my whole body broke into a kind of frozen mode, like I couldn't believe what I was looking at, but I knew I had to do something and fast. So I pressed my panic button and called the police. I wanted him gone, time was passing fast, and pretty soon breakfast service would be starting, and I didn't want any other guests to be in danger. As I was on the phone with the police, I spoke in a kind of whisper talk so the guy right outside the door couldn't hear me. I told the dispatcher everything, and of course they sent a call out for officers to come to the hotel to see the situation. It was just before 4 a.m. when the police officers arrived, and the guy was still in the lobby area but not doing what he was doing before. Instead, in a very dramatic way, he went down on his knees and yelled, "Not me, not me." I made my way out of the office, feeling safer that the police were there, and while he was still on his knees with his hands above his head, I told one officer everything that I told dispatch. The officers tried to communicate with him that he and his lady friend needed to leave the premises. There was a language barrier. I think the guy was Polish, he kept saying "not me" or "I no go." One officer asked to be let into his room to check on the lady friend. As soon as I opened the door, we were hit with the most foul of smells ever. It smelled like urine and feces, bottles of beer scattered everywhere, and hard drugs on the bedroom desk. The lady friend was sitting up naked on the bed that was drenched with urine and alcohol. I've never seen anything like it. After much arguing and a lot more police officers arriving with a riot van, the guy was arrested and was put into the back of the van. A relative arrived just before 6:15 a.m. to collect the lady. They couldn't be more apologetic, trying to explain to me that both of them had mental issues and had been missing for days. I tried to be understanding, I really did, but after what I saw, at that moment I just wanted them gone. By 6:45 a.m. the police and the couple were gone. And the day manager arrived. I told them everything and showed them what had happened on the CCTV. They gave me a big hug and praised me for how I treated the situation, but all I wanted to do was go home and take a long hot shower and go to bed. I was exhausted. It's been a few weeks, and I was told the guy was charged with indecent exposure and the lady is staying with a relative. I really do hope that both of them get the help they desperately need. As for me, I'm still working there. I'm not about to let one major incident make me leave a job I love. But what it has taught me is to always trust your gut. If I hadn't run to the office when I did, God knows what would have happened to me. As a correctional officer, I've had tons of experiences. I've worked as a correctional officer for a long time. I've worked at facilities in Texas and in Michigan. The oldest prison I've ever worked at just recently started to close in Michigan, and it got me thinking about all the paranormal experiences I've had there and in the other prisons I've worked at. I'd like to share with all of you some of the more notable paranormal experiences that I've had while working in these prisons. First off, I'd like to say that I never really believed in ghosts before I started working as a correctional officer. I started off working in Texas at an intake facility. I worked night shifts 12 hours from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. The first experience that I ever had was working on a lower security housing unit. When finishing a round, I was chatting with my partner, and I heard a loud banging sound. It was around 3 a.m. at this point. No prisoners should be out of their bunks. I asked my partner if they knew what the banging was. They, being an older officer, told me bluntly that the unit we were working on was haunted. They told me the sound was coming from a door of one of small quiet cells in a hallway not directly visible from the officer station and about how a prisoner had died in one. The prisoner allegedly died because the officers working there at the time had given them a sack of food when it was lunchtime for prisoners, and the prisoner had choked on the food and died. I really didn't believe that the unit was haunted, so I decided to go look at this door. The sound volume increased as I got closer to the door. The door itself was visibly shaking as if someone was pounding on it. There was nothing that could have been causing the door to shake like it was. I was at a loss for words. Later that night I checked the door again, and there was a steamed up handprint visible on the glass of the door's window. Another experience I had was at the same facility but at a different housing unit. It was around 1 to 2 a.m., and I was sitting inside the officer station watching the cameras and talking to my partner. I look at one of the cameras and clearly see a prisoner sitting at a table in the day room. I turn my head to look at the day room, and no one is sitting at the table I just saw on camera. I ask my partner to go check it out because no one is supposed to be out of bed yet. I roll back the time on the camera to see if I could see where the prisoner might have gone. The prisoner on the camera literally slowly fades away and vanishes completely. My partner comes back into the officer station, and we both watch this video over and over. Later on that same night during one of my rounds, I notice a wet floor sign that got left out. I return it to the porter closet. I get back to the officer station and look back to where the porter closet is and see the same wet floor sign left out. I ask my partner if they are playing a joke on me or something because I just put the sign away. The partner denies doing anything with it. I go back out and make sure I put the sign back in the closet and lock the door. Get back to the officer station. The wet floor sign is right there in the open again. My partner and I are both watching this wet floor sign now. It starts to tip over on one end very slowly, 2 of its legs off the ground. The sign then slams itself to the ground. It then proceeds to slide quickly up the hallway and then back to in front of the closet door before ceasing all movement. My partner and I refused to come out of the officer station for the rest of the night because we were scared shitless. One more notable one from Texas. I was working in an ADSEG unit, a really high security unit for prisoners that get in fights and cause a lot of problems repeatedly. We had a prisoner who was sitting in one of our close observation cells. These cells are usually used for people who threaten harming themselves. In the summertime, prisoners will sometimes just say they are suicidal to be put in one of these cells because they are a lot cooler and are near AC vents that the normal housing units don't have. The prisoner told me that this was what they were doing and that they didn't want to cause any problems. Later on that night, one of my partners and I were watching cameras, and all of a sudden we saw a shadow moving across the floor. Eventually it comes to the close observation cell and disappears under the door. This is where it gets a little crazy. I do a round and check on the close observation cell. The prisoner is pacing in the cell. I ask the prisoner if they are okay, and the prisoner tells me that something doesn't feel right and that they are hearing voices that aren't there. I try to calm them down, and eventually they do and lie on the bed. Later on, my partner calls for assistance because the prisoner had bitten into the skin of their own wrists, causing them to bleed, held them above their head, and allegedly was speaking in tongues. When I started working at prisons in Michigan, I worked at a prison that's now closing. It was built back in 1877 and is one of the oldest prisons still operating in all of the United States. There were so many small experiences that I've had here. Doors would slam, you'd hear voices, and cold chills. The first really notable experience I had was around Christmas time on 3rd shift. I was working the oldest unit on the facility. Usually we don't have prisoners there, but we had opened the unit to separate prisoners during the COVID pandemic. I didn't have a partner due to how short-staffed we were, so one of the other officers set up a TV for me to keep me entertained because I'd be really far away from all the other units and get bored with no one to talk to. I do rounds for most of the night, watching TV in between them. I suddenly hear a banging noise from a door that leads to a hallway that takes you all the way to an even older unused condemned part of the prison. I open the door and take a look down the hallway. A cold breeze hits me, and suddenly my arm hairs stand on end. I close the door, thoroughly creeped out. I go and sit down and start watching TV again. The TV starts flipping through channels rapidly and then stops in static. I have to get moved to a different unit because I'm scared shitless. One day on 3rd shift, my work friend and I were working positions that allowed us to have a lot of free time and no prisoners to watch. We decided to explore the prison. We explored the tunnels that went underneath the prison, the old barns, and the old unstaffed gun towers. We eventually decided to go look at the old condemned part of the prison from my earlier experience. There was a big metal gate that was about halfway down the hallway that had to be opened by a big skeleton key. We get back to the old condemned part, and my friend tells me about how this part was supposed to be the old segregation. We had to use flashlights to see because this section is so old it's not powered. The energy back there I won't ever forget. Just being there filled me with a feeling of dread. I ask my friend to head back, and we start to head back down the hallway to where the gate was. My friend's flashlight suddenly dies. We make it to the hallway, barely able to see anything in the almost pitch blackness. We hear something running after us, so we start running up the hallway too. My friend fumbles with the key as we hear it getting closer. We get the gate open and sprint out of there. Later on, I noticed that my friend had red claw marks all over his arms. Well, that's all I got for you all. Hope you enjoy listening about these. So I work in a mall in my hometown and have many stories, but it hasn't recently begun to get more frequent and creepier, so I thought some of you might like to read about it. So I've always gotten an eerie feeling when I'm alone in the back tunnels or even just in the back room of my store, but never gave it much thought until the one night I was in my back room by myself and I had something fall from one of our permanent product displays, PIPS. No one was near, no one was in the store, so I figured it must have been ready to fall and just ignored it. A few days later, I was in the back room with my boss once again, with the main store door closed. As we were leaving after hours, we heard someone knocking on the back room door. We were freaked out because the main store was closed and locked. My boss went to check, but no one was there. We both got goosebumps and left as fast as we could and really haven't talked about it since. There have been instances where things have fallen or been moved in the store when no one is around. When multiple employees have had this experience, hear someone behind us as if they want to ask a question and turn around, but no one's there. Fast forward to a few weeks ago, one of the employees was coming in for an early morning shift, 6:37 am, and was walking from the bus stop to the secret entrance, from all employees before security opens the main doors around the building. To get to the secret doors, you have to walk all the way around the mall, and so as she was doing so, she walked past an empty parking lot, but she saw 3 people, 2 males, 1 female, all standing about 20 feet apart in the factory store just staring in her direction, not moving the entire time she was walking past. It would have taken about 1 minute. She told me about it and joked about aliens, but we let it go for the most part, sometimes joking about it. The next day, my boss and I were talking at the counter, which is beside the back room door but across the wall. The part-timer was already in the back room, and we weren't expecting anyone else for another 4 hours. While we were standing there, we saw someone who looked about the same build as the assistant manager, but they were wearing all black, including a baseball cap, and they walked straight by us, and then we heard the back room door open and close. This is extremely weird because behind the cash is the change room and the back room, and no one typically goes back without talking to us, whether it be a polite greeting from an employee or asking a question as a customer. So we both walked into the back room, and our part-timer was ruffling through product, so he wouldn't have heard anything, but he turned around and greeted us. We were both freaked out because no one went into the back room. It was just our other employee who saw and heard nothing. My boss and I looked at each other and just freaked out a bit but went on with our day. Now fast forward to last week. My friend, who saw the 3 people, sent me an article about a shooting that occurred in the same area as the parking lot where 3 people, 2 men and a woman, were killed on their way to a shift at a factory nearby by an ex-employee who they got fired previously. To say the least, it's never boring at my job. I've shared a few. This one is a favorite of mine to share, involving my mom's one and only time with a ghost, known to frequent the nursing home she worked at. This is her story. I call it, Mrs. McGillicuddy. Milwaukee, Oregon, 1996. Mom started working there early in 1989, starting as a simple dishwasher there. Over time, she was promoted to a cook, then to a proper dietitian, and finally the kitchen supervisor. She was in charge of everything related to the kitchen, meal preparation, ordering ingredients, and hiring dietitians and cooks. That month, Mom was getting ready for a major federal inspection that happened every 2 to 4 years, inspecting the facility to make sure it is up to code. This involved some major deep cleaning, organizing, and repairs/replacements of anything not working. So, this meant she was putting some hours in. On this night, Mom was double-checking the upcoming order and duty roster. She stood up to go into the employee break room across from her office to grab a Coke from the vending machine. To her left, just in front of a pair of large magnetically sealed security doors, was an incredibly elderly woman sitting in a wheelchair. Her being there startled my mother. Trust me here, she startles easily, grinchy grin. Mom calmed herself and wondered what this resident was doing beyond the security doors at this hour of the night, let alone at all. She peeked into the break room, first thinking she'd been left there so a nurse could also grab a drink. Nope. She checked the kitchen to her right, but it was empty. Mom knew she shouldn't be there, so she moved in to check on the woman. Mom described her as frumpy. Her face was in a perpetual scowl, with her lower lip sticking out. She had white hair, dark eyebrows, and green eyes. Mom said she was dressed in an old cardigan and blouse, with a blanket over her legs, and sitting in an older manual wheelchair. The woman just stared forward. Mom looked at the medical ID bracelet on her arm and saw something strange. It was an ID bracelet from the facility, but it was older. It still had letters on it as if from a typewriter. She said her name was Agnes McGillicuddy, and she was born in 1910. Her intake was July of 1978. Mom tried to talk to the woman but said she was non-responsive. This isn't all that uncommon, as the facility seemed to care for a multitude of residents suffering from dementia and other ailments. Mom was becoming very annoyed. She didn't know how someone had opened the magnetic doors without her hearing it, as they would always make a loud buzzing when opened. I can personally vouch for this. It could be heard clear as a bell even with her office door closed. Who would push this woman through the security doors and just leave her there? Mom figured out her answer in seconds. A smoker. If one left Mom's office and just took a right at the kitchen, that was literally the front door to the facility. It was another security door. Also, after dark, it was the employee smoking area. Mom figured a nurse went outside to smoke but took their ward with them but left them in this little bubble. Even here, it was so dangerous. Mom went, entered her code into the security pad, and opened the door. To her shock, nobody was there. Not around the corner, not nearby, nobody. It was just a quiet night. Now, Mom was getting worried. She still couldn't work out how the woman had gotten past the security doors without alerting her. The last time they opened was hours ago. Had this lady been sitting there that whole time? Each question presented more frustrating answers. Mom turned around to return to Mrs. McGillicuddy, only to find her right there. The woman had moved the distance of nearly 50 feet, and 25 of it around a corner. Her hands hadn't moved from her lap, and her feet were still in the footrests. Mom was startled again. She put a hand over her chest and calmed down. She moved in to speak to Agnes. "Agnes? I'm going to take you back to the nurse's station. All right?" she said to her, not sure if Agnes was even lucid. "But hey, that's my mom." The woman slowly turned, met my mom's eyes, and without warning grabbed my mother by the wrist. Her eyes, by Mom's account, either rolled back or bleached white. She said the woman's mouth opened, full of black, rancid teeth. She screamed an inhuman scream she said was not unlike Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and squeezed. She said she'd never had her wrist squeezed so hard in her life. She tugged and bucked, and on the third try she got her wrist free. She fled, around the corner, still hearing that inhuman and evil scream. She slammed the door on her office and hit the panic button on her desk to notify the nurse's desk nearby. She hid. The night nurses, a pair of male interns, came and found my mom rattled and shaking like a leaf. When she calmed down, she told them about what just happened. The men were shocked. Not only by her story, but also the bruise on her arm in the shape of a human hand, which could only have been made by another person. They also were confused, as they'd had a clear sight of the entire hallway leading up to the security doors, and said that nobody went by, nor could have without them knowing. Not without some spy moves. Mom decided it was enough and got home. After the inspection, she passed with flying colors. Mom decided to look into this woman. Being a senior staff member, it granted her access to some records. She checked every file but couldn't find anything in the dietary account for Mrs. McGillicuddy. She went to the administration department and also found nothing. It would seem there was no current resident with that name. That revelation snapped something in my mom's brain, hearkening back to her days of college studying criminal justice. Sometimes real life makes it so we can't work in our chosen fields. Mom went to the department called Auxiliary Records. It was the depository for any resident that was deceased. She went right to the cabinet for the M's, and wouldn't you know it, there she was. Agnes McGillicuddy was indeed made a resident in 1978. Her file described her as cantankerous. She was prone to assaulting nurses and staff. She cursed like a sailor, was profoundly racist, and just seemed to be a ball of piss/vinegar on wheels. This was likely attributed to a brain tumor, affecting her reasoning center and perception of reality. She had only been given a few months to live but would live until October of 1982. She suffered a stroke but lived for a few more weeks, then died in her sleep. Mom brought her discovery and story up to the founder/owner of the facility, a man I'll call Mr. I. Mr. I was a kind and sweet older man in his 60s. Real family-oriented, a truly good soul. When Mom shared the story, she'd later tell me Mr. I went white like a sheet. He said, "You saw her too?" He then told my mother about an incident in 1985. He was in his office late, picking up some papers for his legal team for some kind of court case later that week. A lawsuit or something where the family accused Mr. I of neglect. He'd be found not guilty for the record. When he turned around, Mrs. McGillicuddy was there. He kind of remembered her, but not that she was dead. He, like Mom, asked what she was doing wandering about so late. No response. He too looked for the nurses but couldn't find any in sight. He checked her armband and saw her room number. So, he wheeled her into the room and saw its other resident asleep in bed. He placed her near the bed and locked her wheels. As he left, he scolded the nurses for letting at-risk residents wander unsupervised. The nurses said they had no idea what he was on about. Annoyed and tired, he left and decided to address it the next day. That next day, he decided to check in on Mrs. McGillicuddy, only to find she wasn't there. There was no second bed, no belongings, or any sign there was even a second resident to that room. Not even on the wall. When asking the nurses, he also got the "there is nobody here" by that name speech. He checked his own records and found what Mom did. That week, Mr. I moved the room's other resident out to the other side of the building. That resident stated that they wondered where their roommate keeps going. Some days she's here, others not. So, full disclosure, I don't actually think this was anything paranormal and was just my eyes playing a trick on me, but it was still creepy and is my go-to story when this topic comes up. I am currently working a swing shift at my current job at a community college. It's dark outside, and I'm doing a foot patrol of the empty and locked building on a weekend. The only other person in the building is another CSO who is in the campus safety office watching CCTV and manning the dispatch line. I walk down a hallway by the science classroom/labs, which also have a cold storage room that houses a few human cadavers for anatomy classes. This area's motion sensor allows you to walk through half of it to a hall corner before it turns on the lights. I had already double-checked that all exterior doors were locked, had done several patrols of the building, and I knew no one was inside, so I was walking in the dark, not really paying too close attention and looking down at my phone when I got to the corner. I looked up and thought I saw a human-shaped, shadowy figure standing halfway behind a pillar about 3 feet in front of me. Startled the shit out of me. The lights kicked on immediately after I looked up. Of course, there was nothing behind the pillar when I walked forward, and the camera in the area captured nothing but me walking up to it. I'm almost certain that it was just my eye/mind playing a trick on me since I wasn't paying full attention and had looked up from my relatively bright phone screen and into the darkness. Still creeps me out a bit when I walk by that area, though. On June 10, 2010, around 0:30 a.m., a security guard reported a strange event at the George Fox University campus in Newberg, Oregon. At the time, he was working the graveyard shift, which is from 2300 until 0700. He is required to do 3 patrols around the campus every night. He got into the office at about 2250 to relieve the previous shift. He briefly went to get some dinner, at a McDonald's, and felt a little anxious for no apparent reason. He chalked it up to the caffeine in the drink he ordered. He got back into the office at about 2315 and set his patrol alarms. Because he is required to do 3 patrols, he set an alarm program on his computer to go off and remind him to patrol. He set up an audiobook and started playing an online game. About midnight, he got a nosebleed and ran into the bathroom to stop it. It is rare for him to get nosebleeds, but they have come and gone since he was about 6 or 7. This one was accompanied by a bit of a headache, which is a little rarer, but still an occurrence from that age. He stopped the nosebleed in time for his alarm to go off at about midnight for a patrol. He turned the alarm off because it is rather annoying to listen to as he geared up for his patrol, forwarded the office phone to the cell phone he carries, and left for his patrol. His patrol route is approximately 2 miles, circling the campus. He can get 1 patrol done in about 30 minutes. As he travels, he must use his ID card to open locked doors through the card lock system. Whenever a lock is opened, it registers on a computer in the security office. Typically he checks the computer to see if any students have opened doors into buildings so he can check in on them during his rounds. The computer displays the time, lock, and name of the person opening it. From the moment he walked out of the door to the security office, he felt strange. It was as if someone were staring at him. This was added to the general anxiety that he could not explain. It was like this for the first half of his patrol. He slid the card lock as he passed by the Coffin Hall basement door and continued through the driveway and parking lot toward the Villa Academic Center. As he was walking along the sidewalk, he noticed movement out of the corner of his vision and heard the light sound of something snapping a twig in a wooded alcove of the building. The area was dimly lit by a parking lot light that was a fair ways away, and everything was shadowed, but he thought that he could see someone a quarter of the way behind one of the trees. He stopped and identified himself by yelling, "George Fox Security, who's there?" When he yelled that, the figure moved to conceal most of its body behind the tree, but he could still make out part of it from the light. He saw the movement clearly, but that only concealed the person more. He reached for his flashlight on his duty belt to illuminate the figure as he stepped forward. That is where it began to get strange because he clearly remembered turning his flashlight on and shining it on his eyes, completely killing his night vision. He remembers reaching for his light and accidentally turning it on as he took a step forward. However, he did not remove his eyes from the figure in the bushes. The light came on and took his night vision, but there was no bright spot as there should have been from the bulb of the light. He wavered for a moment, and his foot hit the ground behind him as if he had stepped backward, even though he had just begun a step forward. He pulled his flashlight out of its ring holder on his left hip, turned it on, and shone it into the alcove. There was nobody there. Immediately he felt disoriented, vertiginous, and a little nauseous. He waited for about a minute to let the nausea pass before moving. He entered the alcove and looked around with his light, but there was nobody there. He checked the ground but saw no obvious shoe prints. He looked around for a few minutes more and then decided that it must have been the light playing tricks on him. He continued his patrol around the building. When he got to the Villa Academic Complex main door card lock, He reached for his ID card and found that it was inside his jacket that was zipped up almost all of the way. Whenever he patrolled, he kept it outside the jacket, and the jacket zipped only midway up. He unzipped his jacket and immediately inhaled a strange odor. It was a mix of ozone and a sticky sweet smell, like rotten fruits, that was inside his jacket. It was then that he noticed, even though it was raining and he had been walking in it for about 15 to 20 minutes, that his shirt was dry and his pants and jacket were only slightly damp. His skin also felt completely dry, as if he had just washed it thoroughly. His fingers were also very dry, as if he had just washed his hands with borax. He pulled his card out, slid it, and then reached for the door. When he touched the door handle to pull it open, he received a static shock. Once that happened, the vertigo completely vanished. He continued the rest of his patrol, but it was odd. He no longer felt that he was being watched. Instead, he was just jumpy. He kept his flashlight in his hand and on, which is something he simply did not do. His heart was racing. When he finally got back to the security office, he heard his computer's alarm clock buzzing. He silenced it, thinking that he had probably forgotten to before. He went back to listening to his book on tape and playing his game. His alarm went off again not long after. He had forgotten the time, which happens when he plays video games, and he clicked it and got ready for his second patrol. He forwarded the telephone again, glanced at the card lock screen, and froze. He looked up at the clock on the wall and was very confused. The clock said it was 0530. The alarm was for his unlocked patrol, when the university doors are unlocked for the day. According to the card lock screen, he had swiped the Coffin Hall basement door at 12:16 and the Villa Academic Center door at 3:38. Either it took him a little over 2 hours to walk 100 yards or he had lost a fair chunk of time. He went along his normal unlocked patrol and stopped by the alcove where the incident took place. He took a picture of the whole alcove and a strange imprint where the figure was standing. The imprint was roughly shoe-shaped, but it had none of the tread marks. It appeared to be just an indentation. When he got off duty, he was still rather anxious and could not sleep as he normally did. Perhaps an unexplored abduction event?